Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Harvey from the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre. I hope you're all well on this Friday morning. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of our online surgeries. This is the third session. We covered doors and windows and smart homes yesterday, and I can see that quite a few of you who have joined us this morning also took part in one or two of those sessions yesterday, so I hope you enjoyed them. So today we are focusing on all things external finishes. So we have a great lineup of talks during the 3 hours ahead of us. So again, as with yesterday morning, we'll be joined by Mike Hardwick in a moment. Mike will give his kind of impartial take on external finishes with his NSBRC hat on, and it will be a really good and helpful introduction to the day. We're then joined by a representative from York Handmade Bricks, looking at all things bricks, which is probably the most common cladding option for external finishes. We then have a session looking at metal roofing solutions, which is quite a modern contemporary option for roofing. We've then got a company called Benks or SBS in Borough Wall looking at both render options for cladding and other options for external wall cladding. And then finally, we're joined by a company called SureSet, looking at a resin-bound driveway system, so a very clever kind of compact driveway resin system. So, and then, as with the two sessions yesterday, the morning will be concluded at 12:30 with half an hour Q&A session to enable us to answer as many of your questions as we can that you've posed during the morning. So, Mike, if you're there, I'm going to make you co-host so that you can launch your camera just for a second.
I am here, sir.
Right, there you go, Mike. You should be able to turn your camera on now. Apologies for that. So great. Welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Harvey. Ready for another day. We enjoyed yesterday. That was a good session.
It was a good session, and I think what was most pleasing was the number of questions and the engagement that we had from people watching, which was really encouraging, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it was a constant stream of questions, good ones too. Actually, it's you know, some really thoughtful stuff. So hopefully we'll have the same today, and we'll get through as many as we can in the Q&A session.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So over the two sessions yesterday, we actually had 355 people joining us, which was fantastic. Great. Bittersweet in some ways, because obviously we'd like to welcome you all to the NSBRC, and so you can actually see the centre for yourselves and meet you face to face. But those days will come back. For the moment, this is the best way that we can do things, I think. So, Mike, if you're happy, we've just gone past 10 o'clock. I'm going to ask you to share your screen. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please use the Q&A button. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can. If we don't get to all of them after Mike's session now, we have got that half an hour at the end. Plus, the session is being recorded as well. So we will, as a group of panelists, go back and review some of the things that we may have missed, and we can communicate that with you at a later point as well. But Mike, if you're happy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Harvey. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see me. Welcome to this second day of online surgeries. My name is Mike Hardwick. I've been involved in the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre since the day it opened. I'm delighted to have been involved in both helping out the technical help desk there for a number of years, and I presented the courses on project management and the very popular 3-day self-build course, wrote a chunk of it and presented it for about 7 or 8 years. Delighted to be asked today by Harvey to come out of my semi-retirement shell and come and give a quick overview on external finishes, just to set the flavour of this morning's session. So let's have a look and see what we're going to talk about. External finishes, big impact on your house. So I spoke yesterday about doors and windows and how much they had an effect on the aesthetics and the curb appeal of a house. And of course, the external finishes, you could argue, have even more of an impact than doors and windows. Combined, they're the things that are going to make people either like or hate your house probably in the first 10 seconds of looking at it. So it's important to get it absolutely right, and it's worth taking a bit of time to think about exactly what you want to try and achieve. So your external finishes are going to affect the aesthetics, what the house is going to look like, the tone you are going to set. Contemporary houses may well have bold renders, sort of a rural, rustic sort of feel. A traditional home may well have stone finishes or traditional brick or something similar. And all of this is going to affect your budget, because there are, like most things involved with self and custom build, a range of products, a range of materials, some of which are easier to apply than others, which will affect how much it's going to cost you, both in buying it and installing it. So you need to factor in the budget as well. I've also put here speed of build, because obviously some of these systems need a lot of application, a lot of skill and time to put together, whereas others could just be you know, a guy coming in or a girl coming in for a couple of days, and the whole job is done in no time at all. There tends to be a trade-off between labor costs being high for the cheaper materials to buy, and the more expensive products to buy tend to be offset by cheaper labor because they take less time to apply. So there's a balance between the two to be had there. Planning permission and conditions. When it comes to planning permission, the external appearance of the house is one of the big things that planners are going to be interested in. They're interested in the built environment, what your finished house is going to look like, how it sits in its environment, how it sits in the vernacular, i.e. what everything else looks like. You know, is it incongruous in the environment that it's in? So they're going to have a big say about what you're going to be allowed to put on the outside of your house, and will usually ask for this to be conditioned. What that means is that while you may not be certain yet when you put your plans in for planning permission what the external appearance of your house is going to look like, if planning permission is approved, they will ask to see examples, physical examples of what you're planning to clad your house with externally, and they will need to approve that before you can go ahead and start the build. So do bear that one in mind. You can't have anything that you want, particularly when it comes to things like conservation areas and any of the more restricted areas with planning. They will want to have big involvement in what the final thing looks like. I put down thermal performance here, particularly for you renovators out there. This is something you might want to think about if you are trying to improve the performance of an older property, particularly single skin properties from maybe the turn of the century, terraced houses, that sort of thing. Putting insulation on the inside of the walls is always a bit of a dodgy thing. You lose floor area because you're impacting on the internal space of the house. And also you can end up with all sorts of issues with condensation and moving of dew points and things. So it can be a bit of a nightmare. So people do like to think about putting insulation on the outside of the house. Now, obviously putting insulation on the outside of an existing property can be a bit of a pain because you're physically changing the dimensions of the property. And if you're on a terrace of houses, for example, and you just put insulation on the front of your house, it's going to look very odd with just having your house sticking out from the rest. So external insulation is one of the things you can put on with an older house if you are in a situation where you've maybe got a detached house, or you can get away with putting that additional insulation on, and hiding that insulation behind the external finish, be it renders or the brick slips that I'm going to mention later on. So you've got the potential to improve the thermal performance by changing the external appearance of the house. I'm going to mention later on, I won't go into detail here, but I've mentioned here about mortgage approvals and warranty and insurance. It's becoming more of an issue at the moment, and it's something I want to discuss in more detail in the time that I've got available to you. So I'm going to be discussing these in more detail. I was going to list what we're talking about here for external cladding. External walls, we're talking about either brick or stone, probably the two most popular default options, if you like, within the UK. Timber clad, as you can see there, top right hand picture that we've got. Renders, which again very popular with north of the border, Scotland, but still very prevalent in England and Wales and Northern Ireland. PVCU, unplasticized polyvinyl chloride, plastic basically. That's another option that you can use. Composites and fiber cement also. The picture down there, bottom left, shows fiber cement. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of that as well. And when it comes to your roof and your walls, well, tiles, metals, these are all, there's a myriad of things we can talk about. So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. So brick and stone. The thing with brick and stone is that it's seen as the norm. The way that we actually build houses in the UK involves bricks and blocks, and that's the way the insurers and builders and lenders all tend to look at how we should build houses. It's very conservative with the small c industry, and it takes a long time for things to change. So they like the idea of bricks, particularly on the outside of a property, because they're seen as durable, they're affordable, they're going to last a long time. There's never going to be an issue with somebody thinking, is a brick house going to fall down, or you know, the longevity of it, or whatever. So it's seen as a safe default option, which is why lenders don't tend to argue if you say you've got a brick house with a tiled roof. It's interesting when you say that, because there must be countless houses around the UK which are actually timber framed houses which have been clad in brick or stone. So technically they're timber frame houses, but they look like they're made of masonry because they got bricks on the outside. Even the people living in those homes may not realize that they're a timber frame homes, and they're convinced that they've got a masonry construction. That's the point with this. You know, the external cladding that you put onto any house that you build on here is not really dependent on the system that it's built on. So you can build in insulated concrete formwork with polystyrene blocks, you can build in structural insulated panels, you can build in timber frame, you can build in oak frame, and still have the cladding of your choice really on the outside of the house to give you the finish that you want. So, so do bear that one in mind. So bricks are great because we know how to make them. You can buy a huge range. You can see that picture in the bottom right there. That's just one of the brick panels at the center, showing the range from buff colored through to standard stock colors to handmade, beautiful quality bricks, which have been specially fired to give a unique vernacular color to reflect an area where you're building. So they range from the affordable to the very specialist and very expensive for some of the handmade special bricks. But that depends on your own budget as to what you want to do with that. But they're good for lenders and insurers because it's safe bet. They know what they're getting with it. Works very well with timber frame as well, because you can actually put the timber frame up and just clad the whole thing within brick and stone in no time at all. And while that's going on, you can have the internal trades fitting out the plumbing and the electrics, for example, while that work is going on the outside. The thing with bricks, you can have infinite colors and shapes. You can pattern the bricks in what they in what they call bonds. So there could be herringbones or stretcher bonds or English bond, Flemish bond. All these things give a beautiful finish to the property. And a really skilled bricklayer can build all sorts of things into brickwork if you give them the time to do it. Brick slips. This picture that I've got on the bottom left here, I mentioned about putting insulation on the outside of a property. This is one of the things you can do to avoid having to have the massively increased thickness of wall by using an insulation backing layer, which has been preformed with the grooves, which are bricks shaped and sized, and infilling those with what we call brick slips. These are basically little slices of brick, just built exactly the same way as a standard brick would be, but cut down into, and so it's just the face which is showing. And that face can be glued or mortared into the slot on the insulation and then pointed in the usual way. And the finished result is what looks, to all intents and purposes, like a brick wall, but is indeed just the slips on top of an insulated backing. Very, very good, quick, effective way of getting a brick wall finish with a higher performance of thermal performance within the property. And finally, natural stone and reconstituted stone. Natural stone is beautiful, but expensive. It tends to be an expensive thing to lay because you've got to build backing walls and all sorts when you're putting natural stone on to support everything. And of course, it's a different skill. Don't ask a bricklayer to do a stone wall because it's a stonemason's job to do a natural stone wall. So one of the ways of getting that stone finished, the main photograph I've got there at the top shows a house made out of reconstituted stone. This is where blocks are made of reconstituted product, which is basically a cement and stone mixed up together and resin, and cast into what looks like a natural stone block, but they are the right size for coursing. So in other words, they are the same size, compatible with bricks and blocks, so they're easy to lay by any bricklayer with the standard skills. So reconstituted stone can look really good and is a good substitute for the natural stone and a cheaper and more cost-effective option. Wood cladding. Again, very popular. You can see some examples here from I've taken from the centre at Swindon. People like wood cladding because it's a natural product. The sort of woods that you would use are larch, red cedar, and oak, sometimes sweet chestnut. The reason why these particular woods are used is because they have a natural oil content with them. They are long-lasting woods. So you might, if you left a piece of standard timber in your garden, a little offcut of softwood, it wouldn't last very long in the garden before bugs and fungus ate it away to nothing, and that would be a problem. But when you've got these particular products, the larches and the red cedars, western red cedar and oak, the high oil content in there means that they are naturally preserved. So when you put these things on external cladding, they will basically dry out and will weather and form a protective layer on the outside, which effectively is like a silvering, it's a silver coat. So while it will look like natural wood when it goes on there, eventually it will go to this silver effect. Now that's something to bear in mind, because you're going to get that whether you like it or not. And if you want to try and maintain that original sort of color, the wood color, the body of color in it, then you're going to need to sand back and stain and have years and years of staining. And once you've done that, you've got to keep doing it. So most people tend to put this product on, accept the fact it's going to silver, and leave it there and allow that patina to show through. If you want to have try and keep that effect a bit longer, then modified timber has come out, and there are a couple of products out there. The main ones that you might come across are Accoya and Kebony, and these are natural timber woods which have been molecularly changed. Basically, they've been adapted so that they have got a more weatherproof sheen on them, and they will last longer on external cladding on a house and keep that natural wood finish a bit more. The thing I'm going to mention last when it comes to timber is something which I just want you to be aware of, not to worry about, but to be aware of, which is when you are applying for mortgage lending, or indeed in structural warranty cases sometimes, if you're building a timber frame property and you are planning on putting a significant amount of cladding, maybe 75% or more, on the outside of a timber frame property, there may well be questions from the mortgage lender, and some will point blank refuse to lend on what they refer to as timber on timber. They just don't like it. They don't see it as being robust enough. There's some debates going on at the moment within the mortgage world about this, but the safe thing to do is, if you're building a timber frame house, is to think about putting something like a render, or at least not completely covering the house in timber, having patches of timber on the house, so that the mortgage people and indeed the insurers and the lenders are happy. It'll be down to case-by-case basis on it, but just bear in mind it can be an issue in some circumstances. Renders, again, hugely popular, and when it comes to the cost of doing either bricks or renders, a render is sometimes seen as being a cheaper option, if you like, or I wouldn't say cheaper in terms of, I mean, in terms of cost, you know, just in terms of how much outlay it's going to require. Actually, when it comes to renders and brick finishes, it's broadly the same, to be honest. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two. So the choice is going to be very much down to yourself as to what you want to do. The good thing with renders is that you get a natural, clean, contemporary finish on the house, rather than that rustic feel you might get with bricks. And if you're building something which is, you know, trying to be contemporary, modern, with a lot of glazing, something which you would probably put into the bracket of an eco house, then renders are superb for giving that clean finish, and a great option. Traditionally, renders used to be the mineral-based variety, which was typically a mixture of sand and cement, which was just troweled and plastered on the outside in the same way you plaster the inside of the house. And that would leave a grey finish on the outside, which would be painted, you know, the Sandtex or the paint on the outside to give it the finish that you want and the colour that you want. That's all well and good, and probably the cheapest way you're going to put render on. The downside of that is that if it's painted, then the paint has got a tendency to chip or to flake after a number of years, and you're going to need to repaint it regularly, you know, every few years, to keep the external appearance looking good. And if it does get chipped, you know, then you know, you've got to patch it all back up again, because it's not the strongest of renders. So as a result of that, modern renders now, the acrylic and silica renders are much, much stronger than that. They've got the resin sort of base to them. They're known as monocouche renders, monocouche being French for single layer. So these things are sprayed onto the outside of the house in whatever textured finish you want, but they can be coloured all the way through. So you can choose from a huge spectrum of colours for the outside. It doesn't have to be white or cream. And this is sprayed on the outside of the house, and when it's finished and cured, you end up with a very strong outside render, which will take some significant knocks and general life happening around it without the need to repaint. So while they may cost a little bit more to put on because of the materials that you're talking about, in the long term they can be really cost effective because they're going to not require the same level of maintenance and redecoration. I've mentioned thermal renders there as well, relatively new things on the block, but again, with people trying to improve the performance of existing properties and this issue we have with trying to put external insulation on, some companies are now thinking about how to incorporate insulating materials within the render itself. Cork is one of the products which is being used. It's a fantastic idea. So have a look out there for cork renders as well. It's a great way of actually getting improved thermal performance on an existing house. Doesn't just have to be a smooth, shiny finish either. There's all sorts of things you can have when it comes to renders. Smooth finish, what they call a Tyrolean finish, which is where the render is sprayed on using a machine which splashes the render randomly on to give that sort of rough textured effect on there. And you can incorporate all sorts of things into the acrylic and silicon renders, things like sparkly things, glitters and what have you. So you can get a wonderful effect of the walls of your house sparkling as the sun goes down or comes up in the morning. Superb stuff you can do. The possibilities are endless. So speak to your suppliers about how you can do that. Other options, well, good old PVCU, plastic boards, probably the cheapest effective you can do, and especially when it comes to bringing up a tire facade from an existing property, which is maybe it's a 1950s, 60s sort of house, and you want to try and bring it up reasonably cost effectively to look good. It's a great way to slap these PVCU boards on the outside. It's stable, easy to clean. Thing with PVCU is, although it has got better over the years, it's still susceptible to sunlight, and it can degrade under ultraviolet light. And so you may get 20 years or so out of this, but eventually something is going to start yellow. It might start getting a little brittle. So it may not last as long as the other natural options, excuse me, which will probably give you 30 plus years of life. But again, if you're on that limited budget, it's a great thing. PVCU as well has gone on somewhat. In the old days, it used to be any color you wanted, so long as it was white or maybe cream if you were lucky. These days, again, UPVC has changed significantly, and there are a whole range of colors which are available. So it's become a good option, and particularly for those working to a budget, to get a transformation of an existing property without having to completely blow your budget. Metals, I know that we've got the guys from Metal Roofing Solutions are going to be talking to us later on, so I'm not going to steal their thunder too much out of this, apart from to raise the availability of metals for either typically for roofing products, but also you can use it for side hang on walls as well, particularly sort of modern takes on barn conversions. Steel in particular, these what they call standing seam metal cladding, which is where a big roll of steel arrives on site, and it's basically crimped together using a special tool. It makes a tremendous contemporary look, and again, because the steel can be painted, you can have any color you want on the outside. You can see an example there in the bottom right of the sort of effect you can get with this standing seam steel. Typically used on roofs, but I say you can use it just about anywhere you want to get that contemporary sort of feel. Other metals, of course, there's the non-ferrous options as well, zinc and copper and that sort of stuff, tend to be limited in their use because non-ferrous metals tend to be quite expensive and are very much dependent on what the metals market is doing. They're also pretty valuable. Lead and copper and what have you can tempt ne'er-do-wells to come and help themselves to your roof. It can be a little bit of a liability to have something like that on your roof. So the standing seam steel is probably or zinc is the go-to. Composites and things like fiber cement boards. The picture I've got up there, top left, shows fiber cement panels, and you can basically clad your house with those. It's a improvement on the PVCU thing that I mentioned earlier on, because these are going to be much more durable, much more long lasting. And again, you can see just from the range of colors just on that stand that I've photographed in the center there, you can get a tremendous array of colors, which can really set the tone of your house off beautifully. So those fiber cement composite boards, absolutely fantastic things. Do have a look at them, and you can make a pretty funky house using those materials. Tile hanging, again, in the southeast of England, very popular option to get that New England, that arts and crafts sort of look for tile hanging on the outside. And it can give you tremendous flexibility to match in with your roof tiles, to make patterns on the walls and what have you, to make a particularly stunning house, which has enormous curb appeal out of it. We're going to be talking as well. I know that we've got a guy from SureSet turning up later on to talk about resin pathways and things. So I'll just take a couple of minutes just to talk about external appearance. When we're talking about external finishes, I've concentrated pretty much on external walling. But again, we hinted at roofs and what have you. There are lots of options out there. The green roofs for the eco-conscious out there, things like sedum roofs, turf roofs, natural roofs, and what have you. If you're going to put those sort of things on, then don't think it's just a case of putting a piece of earth on the top of the house and just walking away and hoping it'll be all right. We spent years and years when we building houses together trying to get water away from houses, because water does most of the damage when it comes to houses. That's why we have guttering and tiles and soakaways and all sorts of things. What we're doing with green roofs is actually trying to keep the water on the roof, but stop it from actually penetrating into the house and causing all sorts of damage. So putting on those sort of roofs tends to be a more expensive option. And it tends to be for those who are really serious about the impact of the carbon footprint of the property that they're building on there, and trying to offset that by putting something like a sedum roof, little small succulent plants on the top. But to do that, you've got to actually plant these into a special structure. It's a layered thing with lots of waterproof membranes, water retaining reservoirs, things for the plants to grip onto. So multi-layered stuff, and indeed specialist planting goes in on the top of it as well. So it's one of those things you need to get a specialist company to do, rather than just going out and buying a few sheets of sedum and shoving it in yourself. Because if you do get a leak, it can be almost impossible to trace where it's coming from. It can be a real pain. So the warranty provided by one of these green roof suppliers is a good thing. Flat roofs as well, you'll see a number of examples when you can get back into the centre. You'll have a look at some of the flat roof options there. The TPO membranes, the Sarnafil type vinyl membranes, which are chemically bonded, have taken the place of things like bitumen flat roofs, which have been cheap and cheerful. But if you got more than about 10 years of use out of those before they started leaking, you were very lucky. But these new vinyl type roofs, these membrane roofs, single skin membrane roofs, which are chemically bonded together, are superb. And they've basically taken the place of lead, which of course will expand and contract when it's been put onto a roof, and can cause its own little problems if it's not done properly. So cost effectively and for long life, these, if you've got to put a flat roof on there, then these single skin options are really good. Externally, when it comes to landscaping and stuff, so we're going to be talking about things like resin bonded driveways. We've got to think now about, with pathways, where those are going to go, what they're going to be made of. And, these resin bonded gravel driveways are a very popular way now of actually getting a cost effective driveway and paths without having to resort to expensive slabs and natural stone and things going around the house, while still getting a good aesthetic appeal on it. That's one thing people tend to do, actually, is concentrate on the bulk of the house. So, and it's understandable, as I used to say on the courses, nobody ever told me how much money they had left over at the end of their self-build. It tends to take everything that you've got. And as a result of that, when you're actually constructing the body of your house, you tend to concentrate on building the box, the roof, and everything that goes in it. And we tend to neglect the landscaping. So you can end up with this lovely pristine house, beautifully made and appointed, with the best doors and windows and everything, but it's sitting in a big brown pile of mud with tractor tires on it. And you're thinking, we never thought about what to do with the rest of it. So do allow in your budget at least something to do some treatment when it comes to external works, your paving, your landscaping, patios and that sort of stuff, if you want to put them in. At the very least, putting down some turf and some boundary treatment to put the fences up and that sort of thing. It's one of those things that can gradually evolve as the house, as you live in the house. The garden develops later on, but just living in a big sea of mud is no fun at all. So allow at least an element of your budget for some basic landscaping at the end of it. Okay, ladies and gents, I think that's just about past according to my clock here. So I'm going to call it a day on that one. I'll hand back over to Harvey. If there's any questions which have cropped up in the meantime, I'll be happy to take them now before we move on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that was a great introduction. Thank you very much. I'll be honest, most of the questions that have come through, I think, are going to be covered in the sessions.
Okay.
So I don't want to kind of steal their thunder, but I've noted them all down and I will ask them. So, for example, Lindsay has asked about bricks that have blown with frost. And I know that Mark from your Cam-made brick is going to be joining us right now. So I'm going to ask Mark to address that in his presentation or at the end. So yeah, I'm pretty confident most of the questions that have come through will be covered in the presentations, having sort of had early sight of them. So I think we can sort of stick to time, Mike, and just move straight on to Mark. But thank you. So we're going to see you again at 12:30, aren't we, for the Q&A?
That's fine. I look forward to it.
Brilliant. Okay, so Mike, thank you. Mark, I'm going to make you bear me just 1 second. I'm just going to make Mark a co-host so he can turn on his cameras. Okay, Mark, you should be able to turn your camera on. Brilliant. Great. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Well,
very well. So it's like a music shop in the background, isn't it? Mike's and mine as well. So
Mike's guitars and your guitars.
Are we in the right place?
At the end, you can do a.
We'll give you a bit of a song.
If we've got time at the end, I'm happy.
Another brick in the wall, Mike. Are you okay with that?
Good one.
Thank you.
Very good.
It's old house. Yeah.
Okay, Mark, so if you're happy to share your screen now, so I'll just hang on so we can make sure we all see you. Just a reminder to everyone, these sessions are being recorded, so we will send out a copy of the recording probably mid to end of next week. So everyone that's attending the sessions will get a copy of the recording of the session as well, so you can catch up. That looks good to me, Mark. Are you happy?
Absolutely. You can hear me okay? Everything all right?
Yeah, great. So I'll disappear and leave you for the next sort of 25, 30 minutes.
Love you. Thank you. Great stuff. Thanks again. And thanks for the team, Harvey and the team at NSBRC for inviting York Cam-made to participate in this external finishes online surgery. I hope you find our contribution about bricks interesting and informative. I think, as Mike alluded just previously in his presentation, that the humble clay brick has got a truly ancient pedigree, and some of the first cities built by man were back in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago. They utilized brick and fired clay products. Clay brick was introduced to the British Isles by the Romans, and they had already developed their kind of brick, a fired brick called a tegulae, which is more like a tile than a brick. And but these were used extensively on Roman buildings, their hypercourse particularly, and generally because of their durability. Some of these things still exist. Sadly, I do actually have an example of one, but I haven't got it with me here today. But believe you me, 2,000 years old brick, it's still got its integrity. And then after the Romans left, the Saxons started an early form of brick reclamation by knocking down Roman buildings and using their bricks to great effect. And then throughout Britain and mainland Europe, brickmaking became very much more sophisticated, and it was also viewed as an extremely fashionable building material, particularly during Tudor and Jacobean times. And these bricks were used to great effect. There's a couple of existing beautifully ornate examples which were built in what was called at the time the Renaissance architecture period. And there's a couple of examples that I've just added to this presentation. So you've got this fine examples of Tudor and Jacobean architecture utilizing fired clay brick, quite sophisticated for the times. The Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, particularly, with some extremely ornate landscaping, as you can just see on the bottom right-hand side of that photograph. These beautiful landscaping walls and boundary walls, extremely intricate, and even more so on the stunning Baroque styling of Hampton Court there, Hampton Court Palace, with these grandiose twisted, barley twist chimneys, they call them. I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to visit them. They are absolutely stunning, and they're still a great inspiration to architects and designers to this day. So I'll just go through some of the basics of bricks. I mean, some of you may know about bricks. You obviously all see them during a day-to-day basis. But just to give you some background into the way that bricks are actually manufactured, not just in this country, but throughout the world. This is the most probably basic and traditional method, handmade, hand thrown, as the name implies. You can see the big pile of clay behind the hand thrower there. He picks a lump or a clot of clay and mixes it with water, covers it in sand, and then it's physically thrown into a brick-shaped mold. He's doing a special shape there, but you can just do standard shape. You can do all sorts of shapes and sizes in this fashion. And it's a process. This process has changed very little in thousands of years. And then you've got the more common extruded wire cut type of brick. These are the ones that you will see in your big house developer projects, and they're manufactured in a long sort of slug of clay, you know, like a column of clay, and they're cut by wires or knives into the prerequisite size. These generally come in a size 215, 102, 65 millimeter, which is the predominant brick size used in this country by most builders. And just going back to that, you can make millions and millions on a daily basis in an extruded wire cut process, whereas a handmade brick, you probably only make a couple of thousand in a day. And then you've got the soft mud stock type of brick, which this falls somewhere between a handmade and a wire cut, and they're mechanically thrown into a series of molds to create the texture and character. And then the variations in brick size is limited because of the mechanized process. But they can change the colors with sands and ceramic slurries, which can be applied to the face of the brick. And these are very popular in the on mainland Europe, but they do get imported into the UK as well in large amounts. So just moving on, there's a couple of sort of bullet points first of all, and I'll go into more detail on some of these as I go through the presentation. But your choice of clay brick, facing brick, was very much be guided by these following points. As Mike said earlier, consideration of the buildings in your local area, and as you can get a good idea of the type of material that's appropriate to the vicinity that you're building. It's unlikely that a planner will accept a red brick in a stone area, or a blue brick in a buff-coloured brick area, or say bricks in stone or whatever. So certainly, as Mike said, love them or loathe them, the planning authorities can offer you excellent advice when it comes to the acceptability and choice of your building material. It'll save you a lot of time and money and frustration if you find that out in the first place. Again, colours, blends, textures and sizes. There seems to be a bewildering array of bricks out there in the marketplace at the moment of various colours, textures. And I'll cover this in a little bit more detail with a few photographic examples. And Mike again touched on mortar, which is a big part of your brickwork, and it has a massive impact on the look and the performance of brickwork. So we'll go over that shortly. Brick bonds again. This is not a secret agent. Sorry about the pun there, but it refers to the way that the bricks are actually knitted together. And again, it can have a massive effect on the general aesthetic of your building. It's more decorative these days as opposed to structural, and I'll just concentrate on that a little bit more shortly. And then design, special shapes. I mean, clay bricks are without a doubt one of the most versatile building materials available. It's amazing what you can do with the shapes and sizes in clay, and it can be manipulated for ornamental or structural effect. And there's a few nice examples to follow shortly. Cost is always an implication in all walks of life, and brick is certainly no exception. There's so many options currently available, and it's sensible to set your budget, well before looking at the various choices that are out there. Mass-produced bricks like the machine-made extruded wire-cut bricks, they're going to be possibly your cheapest option, with the stock soft mud brick somewhere in the middle ground there, and then your handmade bricks, obviously more hands-on and going to be top of the league when it comes to cost. But it's certainly worth bearing in mind that bricks generally equate to only around about 6% of your actual building cost. But they equate to about 70% of the overall appearance of a property. So it's a small price to pay for a very, very big effect. Again, product durability, extremely important with all natural building products, and brick quality and durability can certainly vary. I think there's a question coming up about frost resistance, and so I'd be very, very happy, and I'll certainly touch on that in this presentation as well. And most reputable and well-established brick makers will offer you peace of mind by manufacturing bricks to an industry standard BSE N771. And quality assurance is also a major element in the day-to-day running of any modern brick manufacturer. So we've very much got our eye on this. And good site practice as well. Many beautiful bricks have been ruined by poor site workmanship and practices on site. So I'll cover that shortly too. And then sustainability, which is an extremely important part of what I think all of us, all manufacturers and all builders have got to bear in mind. It's a real key word these days. So let's have a look at some variation in colours, textures and sizes with your handmade brick first of all, which is your very traditional hands-on, hand-thrown material, thousands of years old, but still made to this day. And around about sort of 1% of bricks in the UK are actually made this way. You can have a very rough texture or a very, very neat handmade texture. I mean, the colours in the bricks are generally affected very much by the actual clay and the way that the brick is fired. You get regional clays in the UK, so the Staffordshire Blues and then the Cambridge Buffs. But colour can also be altered with sands and ceramic slurries or even glazes. So the options are almost infinite. And then you have your soft mud brick, which again, it's got some character there, but it tends to be more standardized in appearance and size, and variation is very much limited to the mechanized way that these bricks are actually produced. And then you've got your extruded bricks, which tend to be the majority of the marketplace at the moment, and they're offered in a standardized 215 by 102 by 65 millimeter format in a range of colors but limited textures. So you normally get things like smooth, sand-faced, drag wire or rusticated, and these are all created mechanically. I mean, you'll see there they've got holes in these called perforations. It's just a part of the manufacturing process to reduce the amount of clay. And then you will see some bricks as well that have an indentation called a frog. Similar thing helps to actually manufacture the brick, makes the shape, and then also it just cuts down on the weight of the brick so that it dries and fires quicker. Couple of options here on mortars. Again, extremely important part of your building. It makes up about 15% of your brickwork, so it certainly is something to consider. There's a couple of examples here showing that how a different mortar colour and the profile, that's the way that the mortar is finished off, can affect the overall appearance of a brick wall. Lime mortars are particularly popular at the moment, particularly with older looking bricks. Very characterful and certainly a topic well worth considering. Not by myself, because I'm a brick maker, not a maker of mortar. But if you do want any advice, I'm sure most brick manufacturers will certainly point you in the right direction. Right, the way that we stick the bricks together, the brick bonds, again, it can affect the overall aesthetic quite dramatically. This is the basic stretcher bond, it's called. The stretcher is the long face of the brick, so you'll hear this sort of terminology probably by your builder. And this is what most mass-built housing developments will utilise because it's fairly basic, low cost, and in a very effective bond pattern. And so that's what you'll see most houses are built out of, or built in this way. And then you've got Flemish bond, which is a historical way of laying bricks initially. It was developed for structural reasons. And then you've got this alternate of the stretcher, the long face, and then the header, which is the shorter face of the brick. And that used to actually create a much stronger wall, but now it's generally done more for aesthetic than structural reasons. Similar with English garden wall bond. It's got its roots in structural brickwork, but it's now created more for an aesthetic purpose. You'll also find that the cost per square metre will be higher for these more elaborate bond patterns. So that's something certainly to bear in mind if your builders out there wanting to spend your money for you. And again, you've got to have a good quality bricklayer who can achieve these sort of these effects too. I'm not quite sure what this one was, and if anybody does have any idea, I'd be very happy. I'm not saying there's a prize involved, but it's a very odd one, that one. Something like a 3/4, I don't know, Flemish bond anyway, but if you have any ideas, answers on a postcard, please. Touched on design earlier on. The malleability of clay allows it to be molded into so many limitless and various shapes and sizes, which can produce to enhance the appearance of brickwork. And it's from your simple plinth bricks and cant bricks, which I think most brick manufacturers will offer, usually as stock items, to more handcrafted and elaborate pieces, which is the sort of thing that we do. And brick is without a doubt one of the most versatile and attractive building materials, but again, I am biased in that. But you can see on the top right hand corner there some very long, thin bricks, very popular these days, very contemporary. Manufacturers calling them linear bricks, and architects, and not just in commercial developments, but even now in domestic projects are looking at this type of brick, because it just adds a little bit more of interest to the overall vistas that they're trying to create. Now, this was touched on earlier, and it's very much about product durability. Extremely important, particularly with our wonderfully unpredictable British climate and the challenges that it brings to any external face, particularly during the winter months. I mean, with heavy periods of rain and then freeze thawing action on the external finish. So, with good site practice and the specification of what's called a designation F2 frost-resistant brick, you're going to avoid what's happened on the top right-hand corner there, which is looks like a very strong, smooth brick. It's in an exposed situation. It's a freestanding wall. Water has got in there, and the frost attack, it's frozen underneath the surface of the brick and taken that off. If you're using a F2 specification brick, that is ideal for severe exposure situations. And as I say, that slide shows what happens if you don't specify that. So it plays safe to do that. And an F2 severe exposure durable brick will stand you in good stead for most circumstances, freestanding walls, chimneys, particularly exposed areas as well. And then below that, something that you've probably seen as well on certain buildings, something called efflorescence, not effervescence, which seems I'm full of this morning. It's unsightly, but it doesn't do any damage to the brickwork. It's actually soluble salts, which appear as a white powdery substance on finished brickwork usually. It's very much down to bad site practice, not covering brickwork at night or after it's been done, or just covering it with hessian as opposed to polythene, and the brickwork just gets saturated. And even fired bricks are still porous, so if water gets in there, it will come out at some particular point. Usually appears around spring or summertime when the brickwork is heating up and the salts migrate to the surface. To avoid it, or certainly to limit its appearance, if you specify an S2 designation brick, which is a brick which is low in soluble salts, and that will minimise or probably eradicate it, particularly with good site practice as well. I'll just touch on another option which is available, to the prospective self-builder, particularly with the extensive range of modern manufactured bricks available out there. Reclaimed bricks are still out there on the marketplace, and I suppose they do have their place. These are old bricks, possibly 200-300 years old maybe, which have been come from a demolished property, houses, barns, and the likes. They're cleaned up of the mortar is removed off them, chipped off, and then they're repackaged It's a form of recycling, and I suppose it can be seen as a testament to the durability, longevity, and sustainability credentials of bricks. But there's just a few things of words of warning to bear in mind here. Reclaimed bricks are generally sold as seen, so there's no performance or durability guarantees, testing, or certification that comes with them. And that, as Mike alluded to earlier on, that could certainly adversely affect chances of getting building insurance. And we have heard a few instances of that happening. Also, continuity of supply can be restricted. I mean, the availability of reclaims is limited. And that could cause you a problem if, for instance, you're building a house and then you want to do an extension a couple of years later, trying to find something that's actually going to match to those original bricks can be almost impossible. Again, to say performance, I've touched on price as well. These things aren't cheap. I mean, with all the work involved in cleaning them up and then repackaging them as well, and you possibly will find a lot of wastage in those packs too. So in anything up to 30% we've been quoted, but it's an option. But I think with the number of brick manufacturers that can now emulate the aesthetic beauty and characteristics of old bricks in their new and durable and readily available products, then I think the reclaimed brick is less of an attractive option these days. So look at a few points which are extremely important. I mean, regardless of what brick you're considering, what brick you're looking to go down with, there's a few points to consider before you really make that final decision. I think most reputable brick manufacturers now will be able to furnish you with a selection of samples, either on as a panel. There you can see a carry panel with brick slips stuck to it, which gives you a good indication of what the brick looks like, or 3 brick packs. And this will help you with your final choice of acceptance by your planning department. And it's also commonplace that a manufacturer will let you have 60 bricks to build something like this, which is an on-site reference panel. And they'll give you those free of charge of the brick that you're thinking of considering. It gives you the option to combine it with a choice of mortar, and as you can see there, with any specials details you may be considering as well. And this is very much part of excellent site practice, because this acts as a reference point throughout the project, and it ensures that the building's appearance is very much going to plan. Bricks generally come in this sort of fashion, usually in packs somewhere between 400 and 500 bricks, depending on the size of the brick. And then, although some manufacturers will supply you smaller amounts if necessary to finish a job off as well. And they're either fastened with metal tines, metal bands, or as seen here, they'll become shrink wrapped and palletized on non-returnable wooden pallets, and that keeps the bricks clean and dry on site. They can be moved around site, but I think most brick manufacturers will advise you not to do that. Just get them, put them in as close as possible to the place you need to actually lay them. But this will keep them protected and clean of any dirt on site as well. And also, you'll see there's probably some information that will come with that, or there should be some information coming with that pack, or those packs, about the type of brick it is, the quantities in the pack, and quality assurance information as well, which helps with the product traceability. Should there be a problem, the manufacturer can trace the production time back and help you out there. And then just protecting brickwork. This actually is not ideal, but it's just an example that I saw a couple of days ago, and covering the brickwork at the end of the day, just to ensure it keeps clean and dry and protected from frost. It's using Hessian there, which will protect from frost, but that will just soak up water, and then if water gets into the joints or into the cavity, that's when you can have problems with efflorescence. So simple things like that, which just make all the difference. This excellent publication by the Brick Development Association, which is our sort of governing overarching trade body, and you can purchase this on their website if you want to take it any further, of course. it's always nice to know, but certainly most bricklayers are professional guys. They know exactly what they're doing. So just always worthwhile just watching the process. Right, an extremely important part of what we do, and you know, the brick industry in general. I think most British and European brick makers now are really very much at the vanguard of sustainable brick manufacturing, and we have wholeheartedly embraced the green agenda and are constantly looking and striving for ways to produce our bricks in ethical and environmentally friendly ways, not as you see on the left-hand slide there, but very much to the right, with gas-fired kilns emitting very low emissions, and saving old quarries and turning them into nature reserves. So reducing our impact, our footprint on the environment. It's really a self-builder's responsibility as well, really, to play their part in this. I mean, it's certainly going to be a key issue really it is at the moment, and it will go on, very much more. It'll only get more and more important. And so if you can support an ethical brick manufacturing and ensure the materials that you are looking to specify come from a manufacturer who supports their workers and embraces this green revolution, then sustainability in building is here to stay. And I think it's a good idea to embrace it. I mean, brick is surprisingly one of the greenest products, manufactured products, because it holds its carbon in for 150 years, so at least. So it's certainly very much worth considering. And again, the Brick Development Association has had guidelines on this about building a sustainable future in brick. So we're very proud of what we do, as the industry is, and we're always striving to improve our green credentials. So I think I'm just about coming up to time, with hopefully a little moment there for some questions. So I think I've timed that perfectly. So just a few bullet points in conclusion. I mentioned earlier, so your bricks, on average, equate to around about 6% of your building costs, which is probably the cost of a quality bathroom. I mean, your bricks are there for the life of the building. Your bathroom's probably there for 10 years. So it just gives you some indication, some comparison. And as I say, it has about 70% of a building's appearance. They're sustainable and extremely durable if choosing the correct product, as it were, and using it in the correct way as well. So good site practice, frost resistant, low salt bricks, and it is a very versatile cladding material with all the special shapes and pieces and sizes that are out there. And to a great extent, brick is zero maintenance. Again, if it's done right, there's no, you don't have to paint it or anything like that. It's there and should last, and definitely does. And as the examples of places like Hatfield House and Hampton Court, that brick is there for life. So it's a quick whirlwind tour through bricks. But thank you for your time, and hopefully it's got 4 minutes or so for some questions.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Thank you very much. Time.
My pleasure.
It's perfection. That's brilliant. Really interesting presentation. Thank you very much. It reminded me of not many people know this, but I joined the NSBRC back in 2008, and before that, I'd had a fairly spectacularly poor career as an actor. And so in between those two careers, I spent 6 months working as a labourer for my uncle's construction firm. Spent quite a lot of time knocking up muck for bricklayers on site. So, and it was Lindsay actually had a question about the frost impact on bricks, which you touched on actually on your slides there.
Yeah.
And I recall putting in essentially like an antifreeze additive into the muck, into the mix for the bricklayers to use. And it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that and the best practice you mentioned. And Lindsay said you refer to the F2, which was that particular
frost resistance. Yeah.
Is that just on exposed areas, Mark? What's the best practice if that's a concern?
I think if if you are specifying brick, just to be on the safe side, I mean, an F2 brick will cover all bases, and I think the majority of bricks that are available now in the marketplace are F2 anyway. But there are some F1 bricks, things like the old Fletton bricks, which were extensively used after the war. They tend to be more moderately frost resistant, but in a normal environment, just in a normal facing wall, just in a house situation, they're going to be absolutely fine. But I think you'll find that the cost, it's not an issue these days. Most brick manufacturers actually have their bricks tested by an independent organisation to ensure they're frost resistant, low insoluble salts, things like compressive strength from a structural point of view as well. So yeah, most manufacturers now are producing F2 bricks anyway.
Okay, thank you. James has asked an interesting question. It could go off on a tangent. It might be one for the Q&A a bit later. He said, is it worth contacting a local housing developer or a small scale builder to see if they have better buying power when buying bricks? And I guess you could ask the question, what is for a self-builder's perspective, what's the best way of them approaching that purchase, which, as you said, was about 6% of a budget?
Strangely, I mean, we tend to find in our particular industry, I mean, I know we're a smaller part of the brick industry, but a lot of it is very much word of mouth, and people actually seeing a project, going up and then going and talking to one that they like and they're impressed with, and then going and talking to the actual builder on site. I think the larger house builders, no disrespect, that's the job that they're into, the spec housing, they're pretty much throwing those houses up, getting them up as quickly as possible. So site practices and the likes aren't always their main priority, whereas a smaller house builder, somebody who's doing individual houses or 3 or 4 houses at a time, is certainly going to have his eye very much more on the quality and on good site practice too. So that's what we find people doing, actually just going up and seeing something they like, seeing the look of it, and then talking to the actual guys on site.
Great, thank you. And just time for one more at the moment, and we will try and get back to some of the others in the Q&A at 12:30. But you mentioned the more contemporary, longer, thin bricks, and Fiona's saying, are they able to be sort of mass made as well, or is there a cost impact if you're selecting those types of bricks?
Some of the bigger manufacturers do have ranges of these things. Again, they're limited to how big they can go with with the length, particularly of these bricks, because of the mechanized process that they use. But if like a company like ours or some of the hand-making brick companies on the continent who have made this very popular, this style of brick very popular, we're going up to 520 long, so 520 millimeters long, so over ½ a meter long, and it's extremely effective. It really is bringing a whole new dimension and a fresh view to particularly architects, wanting to specify brick again, because they can have these interesting and quite unique vistas that they can create.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, I think that's all the time we've got for now, Mark. But
sure.
If I can ask you to turn off your video and mute yourself, and we will see you again at 12:30 for the Q&A. So for now, thank you very much, Mark.
My pleasure. Cheers.
And now I'm going to introduce Kevin. Kevin is from Metal Roofing Solutions. So I can see, sorry, Kevin, I'm just going to make you a co-host so you can start your video up. So Kevin, you should be able to reveal yourself on camera now. Brilliant. There you go. So morning, Kevin, how are you?
Morning, fine, still morning.
Just about, yeah. So thank you for joining us, Kevin. So I know you were sat listening into that talk, so you've got a kind of gauge for the type of presentation. So you're going to be taking us up onto the roof now, I understand.
Yep, roof finishes, multi-metal. So I'll kick off with a slideshow.
Great, yeah. So if you get that started, and I'll just hang fire until you're happy. Okay, that all looks good to me, Kevin. So I shall leave you to it and enjoy the next 25 minutes or so, and I'll see you at the end of your session.
That's a hint to set the timer, I guess. Yeah, okay, it's on. Right, Metal Solutions. Hello, everybody. We're a multi-metal distributor. based in Bolton in Lancashire. We have a new depot opened in Glasgow, and we have partnerships in Kent and Ireland. So we offer a national coverage. We differ from most other distributors in that we also have a fabrication shop. So we manufacture ornamentation, rainwater goods, bespoke systems, cladding systems, and with that working to provide specific specialist installers or individual home owners, house builders, with training on how to install the systems. That's all located in Bolton. Lockdown's not helping that process, but it is open, limited people at any one time. And we also partner manufacturers, and particularly the NSBRC. We're the partner for SSAB, which is Swedish Steel Limited, and their Greencoat product PLX, used today mainly for roofing, but cladding as well, with a fantastic range of colours. When we embrace the conversation with clients, we have to establish fairly early on what the process is. What are you trying to achieve? There's no point in our just selling you what we think you want. We want you to achieve the goal. So we have to understand the nature of the building, the location of the building. Certain materials that we supply are more suitable for hostile environments. Some of the systems that we manufacture are certainly required to be of certain widths and standards to stop drumming, to stop noise, and basically to stop the roof being blown off. So we'll ask a lot of questions. It sounds painful at times, but if we don't really understand your project, you're not going to get the best independent response from us. And there's a point there at the end of that slide saying budget. Everybody's working to a budget. Sometimes we get an opportunity to stretch people's imagination, but not kill their budget. And finally, vandalism. In the current situation, we're seeing a lot of metal theft. It was touched on earlier. Thanks, Mike. I think you mentioned it about the valuable recycling, ease of recycling, and the value of scrap. So copper, lead are stolen. We have solutions that we work with English Heritage as was to offer an alternative material, low weight, low risk, long life, and the same aesthetic. So understanding your needs is crucial. Here, an example of the A to Z. Traditional textures as an aluminium, Prefer and Calzip are also aluminium manufacturers. Arubis is a copper producer from Finland. Greencoat is Swedish steel. Roofinox is stainless steel. And then the three, Ned Zinc, Zinktech, and ZM Silicia are all zinc manufacturers. It's important to understand that the standards that we're working to and the manufacturing processes are the same within aluminium as they would be the same within the zinc manufacturers. So there is an interchangeability. There are slight differences in surface finishes, certainly in costs and in best practices that we would engage with you on and recommend to achieve the manufacturer's warranty. One of the questions that Harvey asked, thanks Harvey, this is a new one for me. How do they compare? How do metals, what would entice somebody to want to have a metal roof as opposed to a slate roof, a tile roof, a plain tile roof? So we've tried to put an objective table here, and The one that sticks out the largest in there is the weight per square meter. So you're vastly reducing the load on the building. You're getting a very similar life expectancy. In fact, some of the metals that we supply have a 60-year warranty. Others differ between 40, way down to 10, depending on where the metal is positioned. But it's quite an interesting exercise that we did. The cost isn't too enormous for the metal, and none of these represent installed. These are material costs. So dependent on the ease of the system that you use, which I'll touch on in a moment, or the cost with your friendly installer, your specialist roofing contractor, who we network with, the prices may not be as astronomical as people anticipate. So I mentioned earlier SSAB and Greencoat and the partnership that we have. This is the stand. This is the exhibition that you would see at the National Self-Build Restoration Centre. And I just want to point out a few options on this here. The red building is what we will class as a traditional standing seam. So you'll see in the next slides how that seam looks, how it's profiled. Comes in a massive range of colors, textures. It's suitable in all the aforementioned materials. So zinc, Greencoat, stainless, copper, aluminium, all work with this particular standing seam. The grey roof is a modern, almost self-assembly kit system called Snaplock that we produce in Bolton. We are able to offer it in all the metals with the exception of zinc. So you can have it in Greencoat, copper, stainless, and aluminium. The little grey wall on the side, sorry, it's not the best picture. I could have maybe hunted a bit better, but they're little tiny interlocking shingles for cladding. And then the black panel on the front, again, the image isn't so clear. It's a reveal panel. Very good for cladding, superb for soffits for being flat. But again, I'll show you a picture of that and will probably explain it a little bit more later on. So standing seam profile, fully supported metal roofing, fully supported by the way of it has to have either a timber, sarking board, plywood, OSB 3, rigid insulation below the metal as a stable structure. These seams are manufactured, and this metal is generally 0.6 or 0.7 millimeters thick for roofing. So it has to have that support so that you can walk on the roof whilst it's being installed, and for any maintenance, roof light installations, anything like that, TV buoys after the event. It's crucial that the profiles are accurate, because if you're looking at the screen and you see the little 9 millimeter horizontal line, that's going to house itself under the 14. So then it gets zipped together on site. Predominantly these are site rolled. So again, Mike, you were quite correct. They turn up on site with a humongous coil. Well, the coils can be specific. So they can be 100 kilos, they can be 50 kilos from our facility. And yet they put the metal through a profiling machine, come out with a roof tray that looks like this. And then it's mechanically formed and fixed onto the site using secret fix stainless clips. And the guide at the bottom there, the recommendations today, minimum slope 5 degrees for this 25 millimeter high standing seam. We do see it going down to 3 degrees. We prefer not to see it below that, but we know things happen on site. So I mentioned it would be formed on site. The angle standing seam shown here is basically that seam under its first closing process. And that could also be used as a vertical cladding, either with the seam in a vertical application, or with the fold facing down on a horizontal or diagonal orientation. So it's just another way of relieving the stress on the cladding. So, when you use it on the roof, you would use a double standing seam. If you put the double standing seam on a wall in too wide a panel, you can end up with some technically called oil canning, metal stress, metal deflection is possibly the best word. We minimize that by using the angle seam or reducing the seam centers. Here, typically, these seam centers would be on a roof at 530, but on a wall, probably 430 or even less. The seam is suitable for folding. Remember the little tiny red roof on our exhibition stand? So this, once it's formed, can be curved or can be delivered, curved in section, both convex and concave, permitting water to drain. Obviously, there's got to be a gutter at the bottom of a slope. So it's quite an interesting profile to play with in shape and form. How do we fix it to the roof? There are two types of clips for the standing seam. There's a securing clip, a fixed clip, which would be fixed in relation to the roof pitch where the green zones are. And then, because all metals expand to a greater or lesser degree, dependent on the material, these clips, the sliding clips, which have a gate at the bottom, allow the metal to expand. So these clips will always be wrapped up and enclosed within the seam. You'll never see the clips, or you should never see the clips even shadowing through the metal. But it allows the metal roof to expand and contract as the sun shines or not. And you know, you can have in the UK, you can have glorious days of change of temperature, change of light, change of heat, every hour by the hour, so the metal will react accordingly. And it's very important that these clips are fixed in the correct positions. It's part of the training that we offer, and it's also national standards of how these clips are inserted. For exceptionally long roofs, where in particular you could be exceeding the maximum length of the metal, there are extra long clips available. And again, through dialogue and design, it's something that we assist architects or individuals with that information. The more modern site rolled system that we offer is called Snaplock. Again, training's available on installing this, and it's on show at the NSBRC, but it's becoming quite interesting to self-builders. I did have a question from a visitor who asked, why would he need installers? On this system, he doesn't if he's got a head for heights. And this is also suitable for cladding. So it's a really nice, simple system to install. It's factory rolled in Bolton, so delivered in sheet lengths. You can see it's a slightly different profile, much easier to engage on site, less tools. Some of our professional, if you like, specialist roofing contractor customers are now also looking at this where they need economy of scale or speed, and it just saves on time of installation. So it becomes a very cost-effective solution. Available in 2 standard widths, respecting again the height of the seam in relation to the slope. We start with a 500 wide coil and produce 2 widths. We can do special widths. We can do taper sheets if it's required. So there's still flexibility within what looks like a modularized system. Same principles apply in terms of expansion and contraction. The metal hasn't changed, but the clipping technique has. So because this profile isn't welted and the clip isn't wrapped within the standing seam profile, it's a very simple clip. So there's no guessing where it is. All we have to do is change this free movement clip to a fixed clip by notching it, or notching the material behind it so it doesn't slip off the roof, or putting a rivet through the clip and the standing seam joint at the relative position to allow the rest of the roof to expand and contract. And you'll see from the low pitch roofs, 3 to 7 degrees, you can have expansion in both directions, which would effectively allow us to almost double the maximum normal standard allowance for a metal on a roof. How do we allow expansion? Expansion is shown here by you'll see in the center of the sketch here of a roof detail, like a letter T, slight slope, and then the roof is hooked onto this apron. This apron is a flashing. It protects from any moisture that comes in through the ends of the sheets entering the building. And you can see there's a little check welt with a clip at the end of the, I should have put a pointer on here. There's a clip that holds this trim in place. And in this situation, we've got a plywood or softwood construction panel, and it's ventilated. So this air can enter at this point. Even if there's a gutter in situ here, we can get air in here. We could get it in through the soffit. This will keep the substructure dry. And then, of course, air in at the eaves needs a chimney, an exit point at the ridge, which I'll show you in the next slide. So we supply all this information to the roofer. We supply all this information to architects into how to detail the project. It's quite an in-depth study, and we also assist with the writing of the specifications. Here's the ridge. This is a very contemporary, low-profile ridge situation, and the air simply come along between the rafters, and it can exit over the back of the upstand of the sheet. And then there's a ventilated foam filler here that stops the water, stops the wind, stops the dirt blowing in, but allows the air to exit. We fabricate all these details when we're making the sheets for the roof. So all the client needs to do is give us the angle of slope. We'll modify this leg. Are we fitting on a timber tree? Fine. If we're fitting onto the rafters, at what angle do we need to make this to sit and to be ease of fitting? And then when it's delivered, it has a single fold here, and this fold is then finished on site by hand, just to make it weather tight. Stop it blowing off. Here's one we made earlier in true Blue Peter fashion. So it's very neat, very subtle in terms of the profile on the ridge. The latest development, this one is a project that's underway in Bicester on the Graven Hill site, where we're using Greencoat PLX Pro in a colour called Mountain Grey. It's very similar to a RAL 7016, which harmonises, we think, quite well in colour tone with the integrated solar modules that are bonded to the panel. So we have partnered with the solar cell manufacturer and also the electrical engineer with an installer. So we've supplied the panels, they've had the cells bonded, it's underway in installation, and the electrician will come and make the connections at the ridge here. These connections could also have been at the bottom of the panels had somebody wanted them there, or on the underside of the PV cell as well. So you could do a connection even through a soffit, and hook up wiring at the bottom of a panel if ridge access was difficult, or if this was a living space and there's no room for wiring internally at that point. And all the cabling is simply carried through the profile I showed earlier in terms of the ridge detail. It's extremely neat. It's ongoing. It's, as I say, Graven Hill Bicester. If anybody's in the area, I'm sure you can find it on the site. The alternative to integrated cells, using a product that we supply called S5. It's a cramp that would connect to the standing seams and then connect to this carrier rail. Again, going really back to the first slide, what's your objective? What do you intend to do? What do you need to be careful of? We need to know when you're loading any roof area more than the metal, and then we can introduce more clips, more fixings on the seams as the seams are installed to transfer the added weight, the added load through to the substructure. That also has to be considered by the engineer, that there is sufficient load capacity on there. This makes it sound complicated. It's simply forethought and planning. This is another almost completed project. This is in Gloucester. This is Nathan and Faye's house, where they've used Snaplock. Nathan's not a roofer. He has a friend who is a tiler. They came on the training course, and this is their own Snaplock installation. So you'll also see color-coded, color-matching rainwater systems in steel have been provided here as well. So it's quite a neat finish. It's quite nice that he's actually even integrated a skylight here, which is a kit that we offer. So never say never. Soil pipes can be put through the roof if needed, vent pipes, flue pipes. It's also possible. Meet Faye and Jay, our first client from the National Self-Build Centre, and they only live down the road. I think, I'm not being too rude when they say they tested the water with metal roof suppliers, and by chance found us. And I remember my first conversation with Faye was, yes, we can. And she was arguing, well, nobody else can, but trust me, yes, we can. We did. They came together on a training course, spent a day on the course with us, and installed their own house, classified as Jay and Holly Master Builders. So it's a really nice project. And this is the sort of relationship that we try to form, whether it's a one-off purchase or developers. We're a small business. Clients are important. Clients come along once, we keep them, hopefully. This is a roofing contractor, a large roofing contractor based in Haydock, near Wigan, who won a contract we specified with the project architect. It's a school, in fact. So, in this situation, we've supplied vapor, a VCL, vapor control there, a hard metal board insulation. So this comes with OSB3 or plywood bonded. We've then supplied also the breather membrane, the clips, the ancillaries, rainwater systems, and the green coat PLX. In this case, PLX Pural, the latest finish from SSAB. And the feedback has been tremendous. If the builder could have kept up with them, it would have been finished earlier, but they just said it was just such a simple system to install. This picture came through on social media last week of the finished project. So it's like a sawtooth roof. It's 4 roofs in tandem. It's quite an interesting finish. Could lend itself to industrial, in this case, an educational building, or even, a private house. So case studies, I don't know where I am on time. I've got a number of examples.
About another minute, Kevin.
Thanks. Cheers. I thought you were there somewhere, Harvey. So this is a barrel vault roof. Obviously, it's common sense. It's green coat PLX Pro, rolled on site, formed on site, and the material naturally curved on site to go over that barrel. It's a product called Mountain Grey. Anthracite Grey. This one, RAL 7011. This is RAL 7016 Mountain Grey. I mentioned you could fit the systems in cladding as well as roofing. This one's up in Lancashire. This one's in Derbyshire. Here they've integrated two materials, a green coat again in Mountain Grey PLX Pural with aluminium plank with a wood effect grain on the aluminium plank. So another option, combination, no bimetallic corrosion. It's something we can offer you. This one's a reveal panel, so a secret fix panel system. This is, I can now say today, this is the new AXA football stadium. I just wish I had an aerial view because it's a monster for Liverpool Football Club. Fantastic looking project. These panels are manufactured using a thicker 0.9 green coat product. Zinc. This one's in Edinburgh. So this is Zintec Mediterranean Blue with aluminium, I think, oh no, sorry, maybe even black zinc pods. Very attractive. I've got Ned Zinc Red on a private house development, standing seam, secret gutter. Zintec Earth Brown cladding roof. This is up in Murfield in West Yorkshire. It's a new residence. Very spectacular detailing when you're looking close in this project. So what I'm trying to explain is we have a multitude of metals. We have a multitude of surfaces. We have a multitude of budgets, of course, within that. So this is gold aluminium called Inca Gold. Traditional Textures is an aluminium brand that Metal Solutions own. Zintec Grey, showing the flexibility of the material with tapered sheets. Roof lights, so intense roof. Harvey, I can see you back on screen. I should
subtle hint,
but I can't resist this one. This is the last one. I'll call it a day on this one. This is highly reflective stainless steel, or as they call it in the trade, bright annealed. The project's on Sky. It's called Invisible House for the obvious reason. So your imagination is something that we cherish, and if you've got projects where you're struggling or you're wondering if your imagination is totally off the radar, don't be scared to ask. Thank you. Cheers, Harvey.
Great, Kevin. Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry to give you a little nudge there. We could have carried on listening for a while longer, but I'm just keen to, keep on track. We've got lots of questions. We might not be able to get through all of them. We'll try and address some in the Q&A as well. But if not, I will send these to you, Kevin, and perhaps we can get the responses out to people. But I'll do just a couple very quickly. So you mentioned your training course.
Yes.
Is there a cost to that, or does it depend on ordering the system? And how do people find out more about your training course?
There are costs associated to it, and we are flexible with those costs. My boss might be listening, so I'll hang off that. Send me an example. We do the one-day course for the snap lock. For the more traditional standing seam, the initial seam, the folded on-site seam, that's an apprenticeship. That really is something that's a little bit further out there. For any roofers that are listening, if you are roofers listening and you want to get involved in the standing seam techniques, that we do at least a minimum starter course of 4 days.
Great, thank you. And just last question for now then, Kevin. So Carol, lucky thing, used to live in Barbados for 3 years with a metal roof, and when it rained, it was very noisy. And Julia's asking the same question. How do people find the sound of rain on a metal roof?
Hail and heavy ice that we get can be an issue, but it's not for 24 hours a day. Rain on a roof normally it's not a problem. It's interesting. Historic England are running a trial next week on a range of metals because they have the same problem when lead's been stolen from a church and they want to put a lighter, more durable, if you like, or less attractive from the theft point of view, metal on the roof. So we're running trials next week. There are solutions, and it's really basically down to the density of the structure. Might be that Lucky Carol, never been there myself, but it might have been just a crinkly tin shed. You see a lot of it in Australia, where they're just profile sheets and there's no substructure, there's no insulation, there's no inboard ceiling level. So, you know, it's saying it's noisy is a little bit too wide a question, Harvey, to be honest. You'd have to look at a project specific. The only other time when I've had problems with noise of when the installation has been put in sheets that were too wide for particularly at gable and verge edges. So there are things that we design in to reduce the vibration and to reduce the noise. That can be accommodated.
Yeah. Well, Mike's saying that it's probably corrugated iron in Barbados. They had similar in New Zealand, but he actually enjoyed the sound of the rain.
that would be my thoughts in answering that. But as I say, I'm not
right, Kevin, thank you so much. If I can ask you to stop sharing your screen, please, Kevin.
Sure.
Great, and we will see you again at 12:30. So thank you for that. And I'm now going to introduce Alid from a company called Banks. So Alid, I'm just going to make you co-host. Okay, Alid, so you should be able to turn your camera on now.
Okay. Hi there.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. It's still morning-ish. Just about.
Yeah, we're still there. We're still there. So whereabouts are you, Alid? You at home today?
No, I'm in our office in Cardiff.
Oh, okay, great.
Sunny Cardiff.
Good,
But,
good. Okay, Alid. So if you can share your presentation slides, please, to share your screen.
Bear with me 1 sec. I'll just put it on.
And again, just a reminder for those that have joined us during the morning so far, these sessions are being recorded. So we will send you out a copy of these sessions probably mid to tail end of next week, along with a link to find all of the presenters that have spoken today. So brilliant, Alid, that's coming through nicely my end. So are you happy?
Yeah, I'm good, hopefully.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Right, I shall see you shortly. I'll leave it over to you. Thanks, Alid.
Brilliant, thanks. Good morning-ish, everyone. My name's Ali Thomas. I've come from work from company at Banks. I'll just go on to the agenda. I'm a bit intimidated by the presentations before. They're far more detailed. A lot of detail there. But I'll tell you what I'm going to say today is that I'll tell you a little bit about us. The presentation is focusing really on what we call EWI, but what talks about is external wall insulation systems. And I'm going to say the difference between external wall insulation systems and rain screen systems. Cladding is a term that's quite often thrown out there, and pretty much anything you put outside the building, you could argue is a cladding. So I'm going to tell you the differences between those two systems. We'll talk about how, I should also say, I'll refer to external wall insulation systems, EWI, a lot, so that's what that stands for. We'll also talk about how EWI works and the insulation types that are commonly used, why you would use it, and the benefits of it, and the types of finishes you can get, and then I'll touch on the rain screen facades, and I've got quite a small range of sort of case studies just to give you a taste of it. So with that, I'll get started. So with regards to who Banks are, we're one of the key UK cladding suppliers in the UK. We we're a UK owned business. Within Banks, you have two companies, which is SPS Enviro and RCM, probably better known brands than Banks itself. SPS Enviro has tended to be the external wall insulation arm of the business, so generally sort of EWI systems with renders and brick slips and things, where RCM then tends to be more the building boards or sheathing boards, and then also the facade side, so your ring screen systems in there. Below there is sort of a little brief overview of the types of systems we offer. So there might be some there that you're familiar with, a rock panel, solid aluminium, ACM, so aluminium composite material, normally 2 skins of aluminium with an insulation core, Swiss pearl, which is fibre cement, brick slips, render, insulation, sheathing boards, support frames. So when I'll talk about ring screen, we're talking about sort of support bracketry and helping hand brackets, cavity barriers, membranes, and fixings and auxiliaries. So pretty much everything that goes in this facade. We're quite, and I'll talk about this in the presentation, we're quite focused on the system supply route as opposed to just supplying sort of individual components. So, I've got ahead of myself out. What's the difference then between an EWI and ring screen system? So EWI systems, external wall insulation systems, generally, you'll see on the left here, generally what they're made of is an insulation panel, mechanically and adhesive, you're just mechanically fixed to the outside skin of the building, and then you finishes on from there. So generally within EWI systems, they've been in the UK for around 40, 50 years, in Europe for over probably 80 years now, coming up to probably 80 years. So it's quite tried and tested technology. It's nothing actually that new. Primarily there's 3 insulation types, EPS, so expanded polystyrene, phenolic, which is some like Kingspan products, like foam boards, and then mineral wool, commonly known as rock wool or stone wool. And the ring screen, like I said, an EWI system, is directly fixed on. Then you would apply your base coat, which comes as a powder product they mix on site and trowel apply. Sometimes they pump it on site. Within the base coat, you have your reinforcing mesh. That's what gives the system its strength and flexibility. Generally, EWI systems are known as anti-crack render systems. They're far more flexible than, say, your standard sand cement or monocouche render straight on the blockwork. And then it's finished with whatever finish you want to go for. The example here was showing bricks, but it can be render, brick slips, dash aggregate. I'll talk about them a little bit later on. Ring screen systems are very different to EWI systems. Generally, the finish panel is held off the wall or supported off the wall through support bracketry. Normally, they're referred to as helping hand brackets. So as you can see in this example here, you'll have your ring screen finish onto helping hand brackets. Insulation is still directly fixed to the structure. So your insulation board is still fixed back. But then in front of that insulation, you will have what's called a vented void. So you'd have a 25 mil to a 50 mil vented cavity. So they're fully vented systems, ring screen systems. Quite often you may have gaps between the boards. So the finish doesn't necessarily have to be a weather-tight finish. Your weather tightness comes from your breather membrane and everything stuck on the structure behind the insulation. So they're vented. Generally, ring screen systems are very different to EWI systems. EWI systems have tended to be supply the systems, where in the ring screen market, it does tend to be that you've been supplied the components. So you will buy your bracketry from one, your finish from another, and your insulation from someone else. We're quite unique in being involved with the full package. We think moving forward, that's what people want. By buying a system, you do get a little bit more assurance then of what you get on site is what you've talked about and what's been tested and everything. Gives you a bit more peace of mind in that sense. So we can supply the full system. So in terms of how EWI works or how external wall insulation works, it's relatively straightforward, really. In terms of how it works from a thermal point of view is your insulation board. Your insulation board, you fix that to the outside skin of your building, and that improves then, the thermal efficiency of the building that it's wrapped around. When we talk about thermal performance, there's 2 things you'll hear quite often used. You'll hear people talk about thermal conductivity, sometimes referred to as lambda value or K value. Every product, no matter what it be, timber, metal, and insulation, everything has a thermal conductivity. And the better the lower the thermal conductivity, the better the product, basically. As I said, you've got 3 main insulants that's supplied in the EWI market. By far the most common, probably used in low-rise housing, is EPS, expanded polystyrene. It's the most user-friendly in terms of the installers because it's lightweight, can be cut on site, and they can rasp it, which basically means they can sand the surface to take any lumps and bumps. So it's very flexible. So from the installer perspective, their preference would be EPS. You have mineral wool. Mineral wool, its big winning point is its fire performance is a non-combustible insulant. It's molten rock, blown into wool. Unfortunately, it's probably the least thermally efficient out of the three, and it's not very user-friendly. It's heavy, itchy, and you can't rasp the surface on it. Predominantly, mineral wool is used, I would say, in high-rise applications. We are seeing it being used more and more in sort of low-rise applications, but predominantly it's in high-rise applications. And then you have phenolic insulation, which is the pink board on the bottom there. Phenolic's probably the least user-friendly. It's a rigid board. You can't rasp it. It's by far probably the most costly. It's predominantly used, but it is the most thermally efficient, I should say. So it's predominantly used where access may be an issue. So if you were refurbishing a property and you had, I don't know, a walkway, for example, and you've got a limited amount of space there, to put insulation on the outside of the building, then quite often what will happen is installers will use phenolic for those sections, and then we'll use probably one of the other two insulant types for the other areas. That's generally, phenolic is probably the least used out of the three. If it is used, it's used generally in smaller areas. As I said, when they talk about insulation, the one deal here is thermal conductivity. Thermal conductivity is constant. Doesn't matter how thick the board is or anything, it's a constant value. What changes with the thickness of insulation is your thermal resistance. And that's sometimes referred to as an R value. And that's what changes depending on how thick the product is. And those are the three main insulation types. What I've done here is we've put a sort of table together to give you an idea really of the kind of thicknesses of insulation you would need to achieve. We've picked here around about a U value between 0.3 to 0.27. Generally, if people are refurbishing old properties, the building regs target is really for you to get down to around about 0.3. Obviously, you can go better than that, and one of the benefits of EWI is that it's relatively easy to go better than that. But what this table does is to kind of show you roughly what insulation thicknesses you would expect to achieve, those given U values on these 5 different construction types. So I won't go through every one, but on a solid brick wall, or what I class maybe a traditional Victorian house, which is a solid brick wall, 215 solid brick, you would be looking on mineral wool, you'd be looking at about 100 mil thick insulation. Obviously your finish then would be on top of that. EPS comes in two grades. You get white EPS and then grey EPS. The grey EPS is basically graphite infused, it gives it a slightly better thermal performance. So white EPS would be the same as mineral wool and be 100 mil. Grey EPS then you'd come down to 90 mil. And then phenolic, you would be around 60 mil. You can find that depending on your wall build-up, you may get 10 mil sort of variance on that. Generally, I probably would say in a solid brick wall to allow for about 110 mil mineral wool, and then 90 mil grey, and then 60 mil phenolic. As I said, you can see there the different construction types, what you would expect. In terms of the thickness of the finish on top of that, a general sort of thing called render system is relatively quite thin. You're only probably looking at a build-up of at most maybe 8 mil on top of that. So your entire build-up, if you had an existing wall to your finish face, would be the 100 mil mineral wool insulation. You could add 5 mil in there for adhesive if you had a particularly sort of uneven substrate and you want to level it out, and then 8 mil render on the outside. So you're only looking at around about 113 mil, in total wall build-up. Obviously onto your existing wall. So why do people use external wall insulation? When I started in EWI a long time ago now, it was the best way it was explained to me is that if you look at EWI, it's like putting a tea cozy on your property. It's very easy to fully encapsulate that property. Obviously, roof is somewhat different, but certainly from a walls point of view, it's possible with EWI to fully encapsulate it. So to avoid then any cold bridges around window reveals or even below DPC, you can use EWI below DPC. So it's really easy to fully encapsulate the product, which makes it very popular then on when people are trying to strive towards passive house and standards along those lines, where air tightness and cold bridging is so critical in you achieving that rating. As I said, high levels of insulation can easily be achieved. I've shown you there the table before. If you wanted to go for a better U value on those constructions, then basically all you do is obviously increase the thickness of insulation. The cost in doing that is relatively low in comparison to, a lot of your costs are fixed, like your scaffolding, your labour. Those are fairly fixed costs. Doesn't really matter how thick the insulation goes. So you can go an extra 20, 30, 50 mil relatively easily without impacting the cost of the project that greatly. The only thing you need to bear in mind is obviously your sills and everything. They need to be designed in accordingly to make sure, if you've got thicker insulation, obviously that's going to impact how big your sills and profiles need to be. It protects the fabric of the building. Any wall, how it ages via a freeze-thaw cycle, basically. So if you build a wall today, it goes through that freeze-thaw cycle as the year goes on, which ages that building. The beauty with EWI is once you put that once you wrap the building in that wall almost becomes a heat stove. In fact, it remains warm and dry. It's no longer exposed to the elements. So it does protect the fabric of the building. Obviously, as with, I think, as you mentioned before, with any building practice, I would say you need to make sure that you survey the property first to make sure that you identify any potential issues. Quite often, people may miss issues with the roofs or issues with the walls. They need to be addressed. And you need to understand, what the impact of putting EWI on that property will do from a ventilation point of view. That needs to be bear in mind. But it does provide a protection to the fabric of the building. The one that's quite often missed out with external wall insulation is improved aesthetics, because external wall insulation is often put in the same category as energy efficiency measures, so cavity walls, maybe more efficient boilers or heating systems, which in themselves, yes, they make a building more efficient, but that's pretty much it. With EWI, you do get the added benefit of improved aesthetics. And, the years I've worked, I've worked on a number of quite dilapidated looking buildings that, afterwards, after the installation EWI really does make a big difference on the aesthetics of that building. And the aesthetics, we do community-wide schemes on the aesthetics of the communities we work in as well. So it is something that's quite often missed out, that people maybe don't, if you're just looking from the energy efficiency point of view, it is sort of an added bonus that you get with EWI. And equally, though, the other thing I would say on the aesthetic side is that it doesn't mean having EWI on your property doesn't mean that you have to have a big white box. You can be quite sympathetic to architectural details as well. You can get custom-made profiles that you can put back on the property, so you can maintain the look of a traditional property. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go for EWI, so then I've got to go for a monolithic white rendered box. It is possible to put in features relatively easily as well. There's costs to anything, but it is something that can be done, I would say, relatively, with a relatively cost effectiveness as well. So you don't think that having EWI means that's going to, that my building's just going to look like a big modern white box. And there's no internal disruption. I would say there's little internal disruption. Obviously, if you're doing on an existing property, and if you have any flues or anything coming through the building, obviously they will need to be extended, which might mean some internal work. And I would say when you're fixing the insulation, yes, that's probably going to be a noisy day that day when they're drilling in the fixings. But in theory, there's no need to go internally into the property. It is something that can be done completely external to properties. It's something that, well, recently, obviously with COVID has meant that the industry can carry on, because a lot of the work the majority of the work is external to the property. It can be applied to any wall type. We've worked on actually every house type imaginable on a number of different system built properties, onto traditional masonry properties, be that solid wall properties or brick block cavities or brick cavity buildings. Timber frame, we've worked on timber frame. We have systems specifically designed for timber frame properties, and also steel frame. We've worked with onto steel frame buildings as well, and we have specific systems designed for them, and to satisfy the various different, warranties, the likes of NHBC and people, I guess, we have systems that satisfy their requirements for those different wall types as well. Ease of quality control is, because you're buying a complete system, it does mean that it's easier to keep the quality control of the system of the material that you get it on site. The danger when you buy individual components is that then how do you control that? What you're having, what's actually going on your property is what's been tested and in line with what you designed. By having a system, a specified system, you do then have a slightly better quality control on site. We ourselves generally will, if you want a warranted system from us, we would supply it via an approved installer. So again, that approved installer will have been through our training program. We do offer training for new installers as well. If there's any installers on there who are interested in getting involved, that it's not a closed book. We're constantly looking for new installers, but again, that approval process and those quality control mechanisms put in place does mean that the end product is of higher quality. And then there's no disruption to the fabric of the building, pretty much ties in line with the protects the fabric. There's very little disruption to the fabric building other than, like I said, some fixings put in there. Generally, before we would start on a property, I would, if it was a system built property, something, then probably, yes, he would look to get a structural survey, something like that done on the property. It's not a bad thing to do before you start any works, really. And the only disruption, like I say, would be some fixings put into the wall. There'd be a pull-out test done prior to starting to make sure that we've got the correct fixing, and then move on from there. So in terms of the finishes that we can offer on our EWI systems, we offer what's called a texture finish. So this can either be an acrylic or silicone top coat with FlexiSil, which is a product of our own, which is a sort of a mix between the both. Generally, I would recommend going for a silicone top coat. Silicone tends to perform better in terms of weatherability and cleanliness. Also, if you were using mineral wool insulation, then you would go for a silicone top coat, because mineral wool being a breathable insulant, silicone top coat as well is the breathable finish. So you want to keep a fully breathable system there. They're all reliant on air drying, so they come pre-mixed in a tub, and within that it's like a thick coat of paint with a grain put into it, like normally a quartz grain in there, and that grain can vary. Generally, industry standard is 1.5 mil, but you can vary the size of the grain depending what sort of textured feel you want on your finished building. I do tend to say to clients to try not to go below 1.5, because the finer the grain, the less forgiving it is in terms of hiding out any lumps and bumps that you have in the building. We also offer brick finishes. So we have Speedy Slip, which is our flexible slip. It's basically a thin mineral slip with a binder and a pigment put in there. That again, the system builder is exactly the same in terms of the insulation and base coat. The only difference then is you have your adhesive, and then the brick tile is simply fixed to the wall. So it's basically tiling a wall. The beauty with the flexible brick is that it's lightweight, it's weatherproof, it's not a traditional brick, so it's not subject to the freeze-thaw cycle that bricks are. Bricks are porous, so this is not porous, and there's no pointing, and you can move between that and silicone top coat quite succinctly because it's so thin. There's no need for any big sort of ugly beads around there. We do clay brick slips as well. Generally, clay brick slips will start from about 12 mil and go up to 25 mil. They can either be preformed clay slips, so pre-made clay slips, or they can be brick faces, a slip cut off the face of a brick. It'll depend on really the type of brick you want to go for. Probably the most costly option is the clay brick, but again, it's something that we can offer. And then we also do a brick effect render, the most cost effective out of the two. And that's basically done by having two coats of render, and you simply cut the shape of the brick out of it. So your first coat is your color of the mortar you want, and then your second coat is the color of your brick, and they simply cut the shape of the brick out of that coat. So a brick effect. The most cost effective probably of the three, but I would say all three you need, experienced contractors, but with brick effect render, you probably need a good experienced contractor on that. It is more susceptible to the application. We do a dash finish. on everyone's cup of tea. It's still very popular in Wales and Scotland. So a dash finish is basically where you would have a coloured render coat put on, and then the dash aggregate stone is thrown into that render. Probably most cost effective out of all the finishes, and probably the most robust as well. And there are, there's a variety of different options that you can get on dash. So done well, a dash system can look really good. And then you have mineral renders. Generally, when people talk about renders, talk about scratch renders, or sometimes you'll hear monocouche, or you hear brands like A-Rend, things like this. These are sort of monocouche renders that generally are applied quite thick and then scratched back. Generally, you wouldn't put them on the EWI systems. We don't as a business, because they can't deal. The render, if you imagine a render onto an insulation, it has to deal with a lot of heat being held in there, because obviously insulation behind it's going to hold a lot of the heat. So it is under greater stress than if you just put it onto bare block work. So mineral renders are known to crack. You will get a certain amount of acceptable cracking with monocouche renders. So generally you don't use them in EWI systems. So just going to very quickly touch on, we have a vast array of sort of rain screen finishes, which I won't go through all of them. But I've sort of picked on two here, really. Probably one of them most suited on low-rise housing, and necessarily not all of them. But Supertech Weatherboard is basically it's an equivalent to a fibre cement panel, which gives you the traditional effect of timber cladding, but with the durability then of a cellulose fibre cement board. It can come either as plain coloured, which is sort of like how we class as untreated, so it's sort of like a grey sort of concrete colour, or it could become painted or stained. I've got a case study later on which show you the stain finish on there. It's used a lot in sort of low-rise housing. It's quite nice to use to break the facade up. And we also offer rock panel. So rock panel is a cladding board made from mineral wool insulation, actually highly compressed mineral wool insulation. It comes in a variety of different finishes and colours. And generally with Supertech, you could fix that straight back to timber battens. Generally, that's how it's fixed. With rock panel, it would more likely be fixed back then to helping hand bracketry system. So please come towards the end of the presentation. So we've just got a couple of case studies. This was a property in South Wales, not far from where I am, which was, I think, was a two-bed sort of 1950s, 1960s sort of bungalow. They used EWI here really to get the property up to passive house standards. So I think out of memory, it was around about 150 mil, 160 mil insulation put on the outside of the property. Obviously, what I'm trying to show you is what they've done is take a very traditional looking property and transformed it greatly with a new sort of system on the outside. And you can do that, as you can see, that probably something that you can do relatively easily there. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot more work on into that as well in terms of extended roofs and things like that, but it gives you an idea of some of the projects we work on. This is a project just to show you it's an apartments building in Cardiff, but to show you sort of the flexible brick and what's achievable on there. Sometimes when you say to people, they'll ask, is it a real brick? And we say, well, no, it's a mineral brick with the binder and pigment in there. And they'll say, how will it look? We've done a number of projects now in quite prominent positions where we've been subject to quite tight planning constraints. This is one, for example, we've done in Cardiff. So basically what you've got is a steel frame building and then the insulation directly fixed to the sheathing board. And then you've got the flexible slips on top of that. So they're all individual flexible slips. What I want to show on this side is that it's something that you can do quite easily. If you can see my cursor there, but you see a soldier corsair above the windows. That's something that people can do in a property, again, just to break that facade up. To do that, that's relatively straightforward to do, on a traditional property. Again, not putting a great amount of cost in there. Brick finishes are a lot more costly than just going for a render finish, but just put a little bit of detail into a property isn't going to impact the overall cost if it works that greatly. So here's a case study using our Supertech weatherboard. As I said earlier, it comes in a variety of untreated, stained or painted. This project here had it as a stained, so to give a traditional sort of timber effect look to it. I said fixed back to battens, same as you would fix, you know, traditional timber cladding. But that's painted and manufactured in the UK. We buy in the core board, and then in Stoke we have a dedicated painting line that twice bakes the paint onto the board there, so really gives you a quality finish on that. And then finally, I've got a case study showing the Mary Hill Shopping Centre in Birmingham. This was using the rock panel I spoke about. This is using a chameleon finish. So basically when you look at this board, depending on the light and the angle you look at, it changes colour. As I said, with rock panel, it's available in a variety of different colours. Again, it's something that is used on low-rise housing and housing projects. I've got a project in centre of Cardiff, actually, got a traditional property where over the years they've had various types of render and sort of stone cladding on the side of the property. So they're using this to go straight over the top, basically putting bracketry on and then rock panel over the top to take it back to make it look more unified, because at the moment it looks like a myriad of different buildings on the side. So it is something that's predominantly probably used on the larger, but it is something that's being used more and more now, I would say, in private developments like that. And that's it. I'm probably not quicker than anybody else, but yeah, I mean, if you've got any questions in the car, be great to hear from.
Great, Aled, thank you very much. Yes, we have got a few questions. So if we can keep it fairly succinct, just so we can try and stick to close to the time. So I'll go straight into them, Aled. So Ali has asked, she's got a typical Welsh stone house, about 600mm thick walls, with a seafront exposed wall. Would you recommend EWI or the rain screed system?
To be honest, you know, you could go for either system really on that, and that it's more what you want to achieve from an aesthetic perspective. I think, you know, my head, I would say probably EWI is going to be simpler on that property. I mean, it'll be simpler to get a good weather seal with an EWI system than maybe with a rain screen system going on to the existing property. That would be, but in theory, you could use either option. It would depend what sort of finish you'd want to go for. If you were looking to maybe, you know, have a variety of different finishes in there, that's something you can do. You know, it's quite easy to design in. So you could have EWI in, say, the weatherboard or something. That again would be something quite easily done with just simple sort of timber battening where you've got the weatherboard in sections. But yeah,
Right, lovely, thanks, Aled. This is from Jill. It's got again 200-year-old single skin brick house which has some render on it. It looks like some old render. Could they apply EWI directly onto the existing render?
Yes, I should have said this. Actually, it's one of the benefits sometimes with EWI is that you can go straight over the existing render. So if you're re-rendering a property, generally what you'd have to do is hack off the existing render and then re-render it. So you have a cost there hacking off the render and getting rid of the existing render. With EWI, providing it's in a relatively good state of repair, I mean, I would say any loose areas are knocked off. But you can go straight over the top because you're not fixing to the render coat. You're actually fixing into the substrate behind, so you're not reliant on that adhesion to the finished face then of the brickwork.
Lovely. And just a last very quick one from Mike. Would you use EWI with a SIPS build? So SIPS is structurally insulated panels. It's the timber cassettes. Could you use EWI with that method of building?
Yeah, you could. There's no reason why not. If you, I'm guessing probably you'd want to do that if you want to achieve a better U value than what the SIP panel alone is giving you. But yes, you could do that. With timber frame, we have a variety of different options, either direct fix, or we also do a render carrier board. So if you had a timber frame and all you want is a render finish, then you can do that simply with a render carrier board onto battens as well. But yeah, there's no reason why you wouldn't put EWI on the SIPS panel. I would say part of the design process we can do is we can do a U value and condensation risk analysis then for you, so you can find out what U value you could get and whether there's any issues then you need to consider from a condensation perspective.
Great. Aled, thank you very much. That's it for the moment. If I could ask you to stop sharing your screen, Aled, please. And then we will see you in half an hour's time, Ali, for the Q&A. So thank you very much for now. And then we've got Hugh Haynes from SureSet. So Hugh, if you can turn your camera on and say hello, that'd be great. Okay, brilliant. There you go.
Hi Harvey, how you doing?
Very good. You've gone for the fully branded background. I'm impressed with
Well,
that.
yeah, I dropped it. Yeah, I thought I'd mix it up a little bit and see what we could do. Give it a go.
Hugh, before you start your presentation, just whilst I've got everyone, I just want to show people how they can get more information from the other exhibitors, including SureSet and all the exhibitors at the centre. So I'm just going to share my screen just for 1 second. So hopefully that comes through. So I showed people this yesterday, but if you go to our website, which is nsbrc.co.uk, and you click on the exhibitors tab, it lists all the companies that we have here in the centre. So if you wanted information about the people that you're hearing today or during the other sessions, or you want to just have a look and research various categories for your project, you can do so. So let's have a look. So if we just go, I'm going to go awning just to see how much we comes in. So no one, that was a bad option, wasn't it? Let's go for bricks and stone, probably more better trick. There we go. So so this lists all the companies that we have in the centre that that provide bricks. So we heard from York Handmade Brick earlier. So if we click on their page there, it will tell you a bit about where you find them actually in the centre and also link to their website. And then if you fill in just your contact details and a little bit about what kind of stuff you're interested in, what kind of project you're doing, and submit that, we will be able to send your information directly to this company. So it's quite a nice way to carry on your research whilst you're stuck at home during lockdown. So feel free to have a look at the website. And my colleague Katie just wanted me to point out that just for the next few days, so just until Sunday the 31st, we've got 15% off all of our courses. So if you've taken in all this information this morning and think, right, crikey, that's a lot to absorb, how I'm going to project manage this self-build, we do a one-day project management course. It's online at the moment, like all of our stuff. So next one's at the end of February, and there is 15% off that. So you can find out more information on the website. So advert over. Hugh, if you want to share your screen, I'll just hang fire until you're happy. That's great. I'm just going to put it into slideshow mode. Perfect. Brilliant. You happy with that, Hugh?
Yeah, I think we should be good to go. You've got all that, Harvey?
Yeah, no, I can see your slide, so that looks fine. So we are starting, we're starting at 10 past, Hugh, so I'm going to give you the 30 minutes and we'll make up the time. We'll just push the Q&A to 10 past 1. So yeah, I shall leave it over to you. Thanks very much, Hugh.
No problem. Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome to our presentation on resin-bound paving. I'm Hugh Haynes, Business Development Manager here at SureSet. Just going to run through a few slides on some information about the product itself, potential applications for it, and obviously features and benefits. If we've got time at the end, then we can open the floor to some questions. If not, then please hold on and we can join and answer those on the round table following on from this one. So SureSet, we've been in operation now since 1997, so just coming up to 24 years in April time, I think it is. We've been creating long-lasting finishes for all this time. We specialise specifically in resin-bound paving. We manufacture, supply and install the product on both residential and commercial projects. Resin-bound paving is being used and has been used for some time now as a potential option for traditional paving finishes, as you see, such as tarmac, concrete blocks, slabs, even a clear binder hot mix, which is kind of a bit like a sort of a cheap and cheerful version, if you like, but doesn't have the aesthetic appeal which a resin-bound paving will have. So a few reasons here to use as to why you might use resin-bound paving. So it's an environmentally friendly surface. where the aggregate and particles are bound within a clear resin binder, which allows the water to move and permeate through the voids that are within those surfaces. It's smooth, so it's ideal for pushchairs, wheelchairs, that type of area. As you can see here, sort of cycleways as well use it quite often. It's attractive, so it's ideal for regeneration projects, sort of town centre areas that are being developed. It's being used readily in sort of towns and city centre areas to give a more aesthetic finish. So it looks a lot like a natural gravel, but it's got a lot of properties of tarmac, if you like, which we'll come on to as the presentation progresses. It's very durable and hard wearing. So it's great for ideas for sort of areas, as say in town centres, access road areas as well. We're specified on sort of access roads, car parks, that type of thing, as well as just a pathway around a pond in the back garden. It's also very, very permeable, which is perfect to be used in a SUDS compliant application, which we'll come on to on the next slide. So the requirements for SUDS, or sustainable urban drainage systems, this is something which was introduced by the Environment Agency back in 2011 with an effort to try and make areas more permeable, more environmentally friendly. Obviously, we're building on a lot of areas now, which were previously sort of greenfield sites, whereas now we're introducing more hard standing areas and buildings. It's going to increase that runoff, which is coming from the properties and the areas around. So incorporating a SUDS design into that finish of the area is going to help improve the runoff and be more responsible with the runoff from the water. So SUDS can be achieved using attenuation tanks where the rainwater is stored underground to be used in and around the area. So you could use it for watering plants, that type of thing. It can also be used, if it's clean, then it can be used in sort of the housing water system. So it could be used for laundry, washing, that type of stuff. Retention ponds, probably seen them around housing developments and motorway service stations with sort of reed beds in them. Soakaways, so allowing the water to infiltrate into the substrate, and then using the surface runoff that's gone into soft landscaping areas. And finally, obviously the crux of what we're talking about is a permeable paving system. So that can be used in conjunction with a lot of these other efforts. So you don't need to incorporate specific drainage within the project, as the water can drain right away through the build-up. So even traditional areas are being used, sort of loose stone areas. You can use our cellular structure, permeable block paving, grasscrete. So there's a lot of these different areas that can be used and integrated into a sustainable urban drainage system. Permeable paving being sort of one which gives a lot of different finishes and lots of different uses. Resin-bound paving, as you can see from this video, is highly permeable. A couple of interesting facts from with regards to the SUDS background. Syria, who are the UK body that leads a lot of research into sustainable urban drainage systems, state that a permeable surface can remove 60 to 95% of suspended solids and potentially 70 to 90% of hydrocarbons from that water runoff. So it can be used in a lot of these areas, but an interesting fact there is it can be used by homeowners to create their driveway or paving areas without the need for a specific planning application, because it doesn't impact on the runoff from your area, which, as you may know, if you're going to discharge water from your property onto the highways, you're responsible for that. So you need to actually be involved in reducing the amount of runoff that goes onto those highways areas. It's then going to be impacting on the drainage around the area. So there's two different types of resin surface available. Resin bonded, which is a 2-layer scatter system where the resin is sprayed or painted on the surface and the aggregate is cast on the top. As you can imagine, when that's bound or adhered by just the base of the resin of the aggregate surface, it can become loose over time. Generally, those types of surface would have a design life of 5 to 7 years. In comparison to that, we've got resin bound, which is what we at SureSet specialise in. So it's a 1-layer system where the aggregate is mixed within the resin and it's laid as almost like a carpet or a screed across the surface. It's fully bound. Those aggregates are encapsulated in the resin, so it's fully bound, so you don't actually have that loose stone. And as you can see, the resin bonded is impermeable because it kind of caps the surface before that aggregate is laid on the top, whereas the resin bound is fully permeable, so it is, as we mentioned, SUDS compliant. we would generally say that our resin-bound material has a design life of up to 25 years. So potentially a very, very long-lasting surface. It's important that you select a resin that is UV stable, or a surface that's incorporating a resin that's UV stable, so it will ensure that it doesn't yellow over time and also won't become brittle, sort of crockery or anything at home using an epoxy glue. It can become yellow when it's left in the sunlight. That same sort of thing will happen if an inferior resin is used. So we've recently launched a trade product, Pro Resin, which is using the same resin that our installation teams use, but offering that to tradespeople. So it can be bought in bulk and used with an aggregate to provide a high quality finish. We've got online ordering service produced, which gives it very easy. You can order it through the app or via an email website form. So it is very much just a couple of clicks of the button. You can order that. We've got full technical support available, which has got the benefit of the 24 years that we've been in operation, plus other people been in and around the industry, asphalt industry, etc., for a long period of time up till now. So we've got a lot of technical support housed within our four walls at SureSet are all, well, virtual four walls as it is at the moment, but a lot of technical support which can help you answer many questions along the way. And if you're buying a Pro Resin from us, we'll give you a unique discount code, so you can then use that to purchase your aggregate from the aggregate suppliers, and you'll get a further discount. Just going to explain a little bit now about the actual resin that's used. So as you see, it's a crystal clear resin, as you can see from the the image in the middle there. But the resin, it's got almost an appearance of water, if you like. Certainly the one part of it, the isocyanate part of the resin, is crystal clear, which is important when you're producing high class finishes with the number of sort of types of aggregates that we've got available as well. It's a 3-part chemically curing resin. So the 2 main parts of the resin plus the 3rd part, which is a catalyst, which is required to be added to every mix that we lay, because without that, the resin won't actually cure properly. But it gives us complete control to cure that resin almost to a clock that we would set. So if it's colder weather like we've got at the moment, we can increase the amount of catalyst so it cures faster. And if it's hot weather like we occasionally get in the summer, I know it's not as hot as some places, but it does impact on there sometimes. When the ground temperature is going up to sort of 30, 40 degrees, sometimes that can impact on the curing time. So we can reduce that catalyst down to a fraction of a milliliter sometimes to really reduce that curing time. So you've still got the workability of the product. And a part of it is derived from a plant source. Obviously, there's some parts which come from other sources, but half the resin that we use, 50% of the resin we use, comes from a plant-derived source, which I'm not, obviously you can't, it's a trade secret, so I'm at pains to let you know what that is, but it's something which is more environmentally friendly than a lot of building materials that are out there. So you can see the resin here. It's the non-UV stable on the left-hand side, which has gone a little bit yellow, which will also become quite brittle over time. And then the UV stable, which we offer, which doesn't become discolored over time. So the benefit of that is that the resin, which we encapsulate the aggregates in, showcases those aggregates that we use. So when we're using some of the higher quality, really aesthetically pleasing aggregates, then it doesn't impact on those, and you can still see the beauty of those coming through. So the resin-bound paving, it can be used in a number of different areas, and it's got various different blends which are created over time, so that it can be used for a lot of different areas and very hard wearing. And we tweak those blends and manufacture those dependent on what the area is going to be used for. So a few features of the material is obviously it's decorative. You can see here the natural gravel appearance coming through offset against the sets. No color change because of the resin that we use. Very durable. It is, to a degree, flexible as well. So that resin is allowed to bend slightly around the aggregate, which allows it to move, just a fraction with the sort of ground that's moving under the surface. So if it's laid on an asphalt, for example, it's got very, very similar properties to that base course of asphalt. So it is able to move slightly, so you don't get the cracking and brittleness that you might get with, for example, a concrete finish. It's frost resistant. Because those voids are around the aggregate are all interconnecting, it allows the water to permeate through there. So when that frost freezes, it doesn't expand and crack it too much. So you don't get a freeze thaw, or you don't get bubbles of moisture within the surface that can blow the surface or crack it, which you might get with other sort of surfaces, particularly sort of concrete. You may have seen that in and around the area. It's easily maintained. We'll come on that a bit more. There's no loose stone, wheelchair friendly, because it's all one, see these parking bays, for example, it's all one continual lay. You don't have lots of changes in surface like you would with a slab or block area. So wheelchair friendly. It's oil resistant. We would say to clean the oil if there's any oil spilt on the area, if it's a driveway or a car park. A bit like if you get it on a carpet, for example, if you flush that through and clean it quite quickly, you can clear that, it will come off. But if it's left to dry, that residue can be a bit nasty, a bit stain as well. And as I say, UV stable and a controllable curing process. So now just going to have a look at some of the range of colours that we've got available. It's obviously important to select the aggregate that you're using very, very carefully because of the colours that you're using. You don't want to use a really light area on a driveway, for example, because the tyres could mark that. So when we're selecting the aggregate that we use, it's graded and blended to ensure that there's maximum strength in there. All mixes are designed in the lab. So we would test those in a small confined area, so it's controlled testing is carried out to make sure that it's suitable, and then we roll that out and use it as a larger area, larger test area. We've installed many different areas along the time that we've been in operation and tested different blends, different ratios of smaller stone to larger stone to try and make sure that we create stronger blends. We've got the resin and aggregate ratio down to something very much to sort of a fine tea to what we would actually recommend and suggest would be the most robust area. Most of the aggregates that we use are sourced within the UK. We have marble, which we use, which is quarried mainly, as you'd expect, in Spain and Italy, but we've got access to quite an extensive range of material through a network of suppliers that we use. Clients always have the freedom to choose the different aggregates that they use. So you can see along the bottom, which we'll come along to in a moment as well, the range that we've got available ranges right from a sort of very, very light colours all the way up to almost a black, almost like a tarmac. And then the last disc that we've got there is a rubber mixed with aggregate. So it gives the flexibility of the rubber, so it can be laid on slightly different base course, but still gives the robust strength that you'd have with the aggregate as well. And then obviously the resin that we use is the same resin we use right the way across our product range. So you can rest assured that's a very, very high quality as well. So the blends that we use is important to showcase the aggregates that we have as well. So you see here the blends, the aggregate size we offer is a 3mm, a 6mm or a 10mm. As you can see from the images there, the 3mm gives a very close, tight finish, right the way up to a 10mm, which is a lot more akin to a natural aggregate, as you would see on sort of a natural gravel driveway, for example. But they give different properties, different permeability ratios, different sort of finishes and touches to the surface as well. The aggregate types that we use, we've got 3 different main categories within our range. So we've got natural aggregates, which is crushed rocks and natural gravels, which, as you can imagine, are very more earthy tones. Then you've got the marbles, sort of high-class finishes there, as I say, from Italy and Spain. But the host of colours that we've got available, so we've got lots of creamy colours, some greys, different greens. So there's a lot of different colours available dependent on what the decorative finish you're looking to create. And finally, then a pink one, not to everyone's taste, obviously, but glass. Colour-coated glass, we use clear glass that's been crushed and rolled, so it removes the main sharp edges there. But then we would colour coat that in a very similar resin to which we use to bind the areas, but it's got a pigment introduced to it as well. So it's a colour-coated area or aggregate which we would use to create decorative finishes. Very, very popular in schools, playgrounds, in and around the sort of office areas, create logos, that type of stuff. We'll show you a few of those in some projects a bit later on as well. And different blends that are available as well. The grades, open texture, medium texture, closed texture, similar to the terminology that's used in the asphalt industry, but they give different properties, which we'll touch upon a little bit more as well. So an open texture is a single size stone generally. So this would be more suds, it's like a suds mix that someone might be specifying for a highly permeable area. So it's suitable for pedestrian. Straight driveways can use that as well, and tree pits. Now, if you're going to use aggregate in a tree pit, generally we'd be looking at the larger 6mm or preferably a 10mm stone, because it gives the trade-off of a higher permeability rate, so it actually drains through better, obviously allowing the more water and moisture to get to the root ball for the trees, but still giving that bound finish so you don't get loose stones kicked around a town centre. Medium texture is there's generally made up for the 6mm or 2 to 5mm stone with some of the finer materials in there, so 1 to 3mm. So it closes up some of those voids, but still gives a high level of permeability. That's something which should be good for sort of more heavily pedestrianised areas and also turning driveways. Because those smaller aggregates are incorporated in the mix, it reduces the voids in there, but also allows it to be slightly more stronger. So if you can imagine where you've got sort of the larger aggregates, if you've got a large aggregate next to a large aggregate, you've got the trade-off is that is the more voids around the area of the aggregate. So that would give more permeability, but it would give a slightly more open, weaker texture. If you close those up by using the finer aggregates in there, it's a little bit like having sort of a large aggregate hardcore, and then you're introducing some smaller sand particles in there. So it closes up the mix and gives a slightly tighter surface to give it a bit more strength, particularly for turning driveways. So if you can imagine driving onto a driveway or a car park and you've got the turning forces from the wheels, then that can cause some stone to come pop out. So these smaller particles in there reduce that sort of problem. And then finally, closed textured. So that's for heavy vehicular areas, so access roads, car parks. It would have more of the smaller size in there. Sometimes we might have 3 different aggregate sizes just to close up those voids even more. Still very, very permeable. We'd also tweak the resin content in there slightly, which we can do because we manufacture all of our blends specifically for the areas. So it can be very, very versatile. So some of the areas we would lay onto, some of the bases that we would lay onto, an ideal base would be either a concrete or a tarmac base or asphalt, because it's a very, very strong, stable base. If you're going to be laying a vehicular area or heavy pedestrian area, we'd recommend laying onto a bound base. So something like a tarmac or a concrete. Obviously, or not obviously, but the base would actually give the strength to the overall build-up of the area. So if you're going to be laying onto an asphalt area, it's important to ensure that there's no cracks in the surface, because those cracks could actually come through and cause reflective cracking in the surface as well, if there's continual movement that's going to be taking place. Also concrete, as I say, making sure that it's not got any pits in the areas, because obviously that's going to, one side, it's going to weaken the area, but also it's going to incorporate or lose more material when you're laying your surface on there. So if you're going to be filling those voids with a slightly more decorative finish of a resin bound paving, for example, so you imagine it's going to be slightly more cost prohibitive to install that on there. So make up those areas that are cracked and pitted using sort of either a concrete or a cold lay asphalt, for example. A cellular structure, so something that we use a lot more, particularly in areas where it's harder to access, is using a cellular structure, which is a plastic grid system infilled with a tightly bound compacted aggregate. Then you would lay the resin bound over the top. So the benefits of that is it increases the permeability and also it's the ease of installation, rather than having to get a tarmac lorry in there and a specialist tarmac team to install that base. It can also be laid onto a well-compacted Type 3 or a Type 1 surface. Type 3 is slightly more permeable because it's got reduced fines in there. So that's something that should give a higher degree of permeability for that SUDS compliant base. Or you could lay onto a Type 1, which has got a lot of fines in there. So it's going to be a lot more closed. And then you lay the resin over the top, but it's slightly stronger. If you are going to use a concrete base, it would need to be laid at least 7 days prior to installation of the resin bound to allow that moisture to come out. So it's not going to impact on the installation of the resin bound. And also it's important that that surface is primed. So we've got a specialist primer that we offer, which can be laid over the surface, installed here as you got, which is using a roller, which is just a little bit like if you're priming walls before you're putting a plaster coat on, something like that, just to help increase the adhesion between the resin bound and the base. It can also help on a sort of newly laid to help keep the moisture down, but on an older concrete surface, it helps keep the dust down as well. So you don't want too much dust, obviously, because it would inhibit the bond between the resin bound and the base. A little bit if we're going to do your paint work at home and you're putting new gloss on there and you sanded it down, you don't want to be having lots of dust on the surface because it impact on the resin or the paint, and it's going to become friable. If you've got expansion joints in the base, they need to be reflected through just to ensure that they don't cause reflective cracking in the surface. So something here is we've got a resin bound, we've got a joint that we use in a resin bound, which has got a mastic sandwich between two metal edges, which can be color coded so it matches closely to what the surface has been laid around it. So a couple of base options here, or driveway options for sort of the specification build up. So you can see here right away from the subgrade going compacted aggregate, then you've got a capping layer to prevent the build-up or prevent the silt coming up and down through the surface. Then the sub-base, which should be a well-compacted type 1 or type 3. Then an asphalt binder course, and then a resin-bound paving laid over the top. So that's going to give you fully permeable build-up if you use a permeable asphalt, so like a 14 mil open graded asphalt that's going to give you a very permeable drain through. Or using our cellular structure, Shore Cell, again, similar build-up, but using a 52 mil deep layer of the grid system infilled with compacted aggregate, and then a resin bound laid over the top. You lay it slightly thicker at 24 mil. That's partly because of the open texture of the grid and aggregate that's been compacted in there. So just so you're ensuring that once you've laid it at 24 mil, allowing some of that material to potentially fall into the voids of the surface. So you're still going to be hitting a minimum depth of generally sort of 2.5 to 3 times the aggregate size to give the build-up of the resin bound on the surface. So you're ensuring you're going to be hitting that kind of depth to give a solid, stable surface. So sub-base types available, just to recap, we've got the grid system, which can be laid. Recommended thickness, just touched upon that previously. But generally, as a rule of thumb, it's generally 2.5 to 3 times the aggregate size would give the depth of the surface that you're going to be laying over the top, similar to an asphalt. So if you're laying a 1 to 3 mil, if it's going to be a pedestrian area, 12 mil deep. If you're going up to a higher vehicular area, then you're looking at sort of 16 to 18 mil. And again, on the 6 mil, you're going to be kind of talking heavy vehicular areas, sort of 20 to 22 mil. And then if you're using a 10 mil, if you're using that in pedestrian areas, you're looking at 24 to 30 mil, which is to give more contact points around that aggregate, and also to reduce the segregation sometimes that can be moved from pulling the larger stones around. And then on an unbound base, we'd recommend, regardless of the size of the aggregate you're laying, 24 to 30 mil depth to give that strength. So some of the properties and features, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's easily maintained, it's not maintenance free, but it's very easily maintained, slightly flexible to allow sort of a little bit of movement in the surface. Design possibilities and colours, nigh on endless really, if you're looking at the coloured glass and the marbles that are available. Wheelchair friendly, and of course it's UV stable. So some of the colours and the designs available here. You can see that you can lay different colours border onto each other. Then with the natural, the block edging around there, just to give a contrast to the surface, can actually increase the design capabilities very, very highly. More design options are available. If you want to use stencils, for example, then you can use MDF stencils to create a design in the surface. So here, a smaller stencil to give a footprint. This was, to give different areas around a pathway, so you can include design features to sort of say follow the footprints to the exhibit in the bird area or whatever it might be. But those MDF stencils are installed around using a resin bound paving, then removed, then infilled with a different colour. Larger areas, you can use aluminium edging to create a fixed delineation between the two colours. You'd leave that aluminium edging in place for the lifetime of the product. So you'd have, as you can see here, different colours sandwiched between that aluminium edging. So it gives a nice high-class design finish as well. MDF stencils can be used to create quite intricate designs. So this is from a project that we laid at Manchester City Football Club. You see the MDF stencil was laid, then each section is removed to infill with the next colour. It's a little bit like doing a large jigsaw puzzle, really. So you can see the colours are butted directly up against each other. So those vibrant colours, which are colour matched specifically to the badge at Manchester City, with collaboration, put my teeth back in, collaboration with their marketing department to ensure that the colours were matching with their logo design. And you can see here this entrance just outside the player and VIP entrance up at the stadium, giving a very, very crisp finish where that MDF edging has been removed, leaving the resin bound to border against each other. It is important that a solid, stable edge is installed. So whether that's block edging or bricks, or as we see here in the video, aluminium edging, that's because you need to, in effect, create a tray around the area, which you're then going to lay that resin-bound material in as a wet lay product that then cures. So you can see here as part of the installation process, it's tipped out on site and then it's floated to give a compact finish. We either use a hand float or we can use a mechanised power float, which speeds up the installation and can also give a slightly tighter finish and gives a more solid, even finish across the surface as well.
Sorry, just giving you your 3-minute warning, okay?
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks, Harvey. So yeah, a smooth, compact finish. We can lay approximately 250 to 350 metres in a day with a 6 or 8 men team. Approximately 100 square metres in 5 hours with a 4 to 5 man team, and then reducing down as time goes. So maintenance, you can simply brush or power wash the surface. Make sure that you don't get too close or use too high bar pressure, because that can sort of cause discoloration on the surface, as you imagine doing a high pressure surface on there. Chewing gum can be removed using the freeze-thaw method, so it's not going to impact or cause damage to resin bound. Here, where a fox has walked through the surface post-installation, you can repair that quite easily. Just chip out around the area and then install with a matching blend of aggregate. This was lucky we did it the next day, so it bedded in and gave a seamless finish. It's a low energy method, cold laid process. It's all mixed on site, so you don't have any hot works. Low emissions, there's no volatile products in there, so it doesn't cause any issues with regards to environmental systems. The resin is from a renewable plant-derived source, and at the end of the life, the resin-bound surface, if you wish to sort of reinvent the area, can be broken up and used as an inert aggregate around the sort of base fill. If it's laid by our installation team, so we'd offer a 21-year product and installation guarantee, but the product itself is guaranteed as well. So if it's laid by a SureSet subcontractor or an approved installer, then they would actually guarantee the area as well. Industry-wide, generally it's sort of 10 years. We guarantee ours for 21 years, so it's a very high-class guarantee we offer. So just to recap, it's specified by local authorities and architects. Manufacture, supply and install a resin bound, not resin bonded. A 3-part chemically curing system to give the strength, flexibility, and of course the UV stable. Aggregates are washed, dried and bagged before use, so that dust is removed, the moisture is removed, so it doesn't inhibit on the bond between the resin and the aggregate. And the aggregates are blended specifically for each application. 21-year guarantee, which is when installed by our approved contractors. Several options for DIY and trade. So we've got DIY kits for small areas, trade packs which cover sort of 30 square meters, or the pro resin, which can be used in almost a limitless supply available in bulk, and then you buy your aggregate separately. They're available for our online shop as well. And just to go through a few projects where we've used the materials, so we've got access roads, car parks, Aston Martin garage here in Bristol, a communal courtyard area, care homes and hospitals. Because it's wheelchair friendly, it lends itself very well to that. Hard landscaping, it's used because of the design capacity. It's used in a lot of garden projects because of the aesthetically pleasing design. Abbey Road, we created that zebra crossing effect going into the shop at the studios. Leisure paving here at Headland Hotel in Cornwall. Because it's flat finish, it lends itself really well to that deck area over their swimming pool. So that concludes the presentation. If you've got any questions, let's say we can answer those questions now or hold on for the roundtable discussion that we've got after this. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hugh. Yeah, we'll go straight into a couple of questions and then we'll start the general Q&A. So a couple of people have asked, actually, including Nick, is the system resistant to power washing? I think we saw that on one of the slides. Are there any, when you're maintaining the your system, Hugh, are there anything in particular people need to be aware of?
Yeah, it can be used, a power wash can be used, try not to go over, I think it's 150 bar as a pressure. We've got a maintenance guide which we can send out to you as well. It's also available via the website, but not to get too close to the surface with the lance of the power wash, because it can slightly discolor. You'd end up having to really clean every inch of your driveway then, because it's going to almost clean it too much. You can use some sort of moss products on there to remove the moss. So like Moss Go, I think, is one of the cleverly named products out there. But just make sure you don't use anything that's got any sort of high levels of solvents in there, because that could sort of degrade the surface. But there's a very, very comprehensive maintenance guide that we can send out if you've got further questions on that.
Brilliant, thank you. Paul's asked, he's got a 6.5 ton motorhome. What's the loading restrictions on a driveway?
Loading restrictions, a lot of that's based or is born from the base that's laid. So if the base area that's in the area, so if you've got an existing tarmac drive, for example, and that can withstand the loading of the motorhome that you've got on there in this example, then the resin bound would be laid, and that would be generally laid at a sort of a 20 to 22 mil depth on there. We touched upon a couple of specifications in the presentation, but we've got individual specifications our technical department have made, ranging from pathways on aggregates right the way up to car parks and access roads, and even loading areas for HGVs at shopping centres as well. So we can tailor a specification, or give you a tailored specification for that very application that would be able to give you the required depths that would be needed on that.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks so much, Hugh. What we'll do, we'll save some of the other questions for the Q&A. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists to unmute themselves and reveal themselves in the camera. So yeah, Hugh, if you could stop sharing your screen, please, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, Hugh, sorry, you're just able to stop sharing your, I think I can do it.
Where is the screen?
That's okay, I've done it. So, welcome back, everyone. So, Mike, awful lot to take in again this morning.
Absolutely, but great set of presentations there. Thank you, everyone. Good stuff. We covered all the bases, I think, when it came to external finishes. So let's get on with a few questions.
Yeah, well, I'll go for the toughest one first. But I think during almost every talk, this came up. So, can we address the factor of cost? So what would be typical costs that people should be thinking about for your systems, whether that's per square meter or however you would define it?
Okay, well, I'm going to just go straight into the panel on that rather than speculate on their own stuff. So should we start with Mark, with York Handmade Brick? Mark, what sort of price per square meter can people think about when they're talking about facing using brick?
Yeah, bricks are usually, when you're talking to manufacturers, usually priced per 1,000. I mean, you can equate a standard size brick to about 60 bricks to the square meter, so you can work it back from there. Cheapest options, I think I touched on my presentation, are the extruded machine-made wire cut bricks, probably around about £400 1,000 for a reasonable one. And then, as you alluded to, you can almost sort of spend as much as you want on a brick, up to 90 pence a brick, so £900 1,000 for handmaids. And then if you start going for the really specialized pieces like the long linear bricks, I mean, some of those are coming in at about £5 each. So things like special shapes and stuff, which can be manufactured on a bespoke basis, will all carry their own value. So obviously that will reflect in the cost. So I would say a midway price around about £600 1,000, up to £900 1,000 for handmaids.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's a good budgeting figure to use. Let's go to the direct equivalent of that, I suppose, which is render. So can I ask Alex, give us some ideas about typical sort of cost for the render finishes that you've been discussing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably give you prices based on sort of EWI systems themselves. I mean, a basic EWI system, I would say, you're probably in the realms of 30, 35 pounds a square metre. Potentially depends on, it will vary a lot on the thicknesses. I tend to say to people when we get asked quite often, people say, what's the cost? More, new builds are a bit difficult to give a budget price because it'll depend on the type of property and the spec. But on refurb, if you're looking at a traditional 3-bed semi and you're looking at putting EWI and that's to bring it up to 0.3, you probably be looking at something between 10 to 15,000 to bring a property up to that. That's probably not a bad place to start at and have that figure in mind.
Is it fair to say that it's a sort of a fairly standard 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom detached house we're talking about there?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty standard sort of 3-bed semi-detached, something like that, probably.
Just to give an idea.
Something like that. That's kind of what you would be looking at there. I mean, when contractors talk about sort of individual properties, they would be charging sort of all in. Normally, I would say you'd be up with £100 per square metre plus, really. That's kind of what you'd be looking at.
Let's move on to the metal systems then. If I was going to be going for a metal roofing system, Kevin, what would we expect to pay for anything from zinc to steel or to whatever?
Okay, let's do the A to Z. Aluminium is the cheapest. Probably from our point of view of selling as a square meter material, not fabricated, nothing punched in it, but coil for coil, you'd be down at between 12 and 13 pounds a square meter for the metal. Cheaper than a carpet. Copper, you'd be looking somewhere in the realms of 40 pounds a square meter, same principles. 15.50 maybe for green coat, which is the coated steel from Sweden. Stainless steel, depending on the surface, because it's such a luxury item, you can go from 30 to 38 sort of range. Zinc, from being a natural metal that weathers when it's exposed, it's not used so much. You're down at the £21 mark. If you're going for some of the luxurious colours, you'll be up at the £30 mark. So it's quite a broad range. Top and bottoms between 12 and 40.
Okay, so to be clear, that's for materials only on there.
It's only materials. If we were supplying, for instance, that grey roof that was in my presentation that's on show at the stand, that with clips, with trims, with fittings, comes in roughly at a supply price around about 45 to 50 pounds a square metre.
Okay.
And
Good.
then you obviously the DIY fit.
Okay, so last but not least, Hugh, when it comes to external pavings and what have you, resin bonded systems, what sort of budget figure would the average self-builder be allowing within their budget for resin bound paving?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so for resin bound paving, you're looking generally for an installed cost of the resin bound itself onto a pre-prepared base. You'd be looking at somewhere around the region of sort of 45 to 60 pounds a square metre. Dependent on what the aggregate is, kind of would be through a sliding scale. So the more cost-effective end of the scale is natural aggregates, and then moving through marbles right way up to the coloured glass, which because of the labour required to colour coat that glass is slightly higher price bracket. If you're looking at the supply-only products, so DIY kits, trade packs, for example, a trade pack would cover about 30 square metres, and they're going to retail somewhere around about £1,000, give or take, depending on the aggregate again. And then finally, the Pro Resin, which is our resin-only solution. You can buy a kit of Pro Resin for around about £40 a kit, which you would then source your aggregate yourself, combine that, and that would cover around about 3 square metres per batch. So once you've got the aggregate incorporated in that price, probably looking all in probably about 75 quid. So you're looking probably £25 a square metre for materials only on that sort of thing.
Okay, sounds very reasonable. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Harvey, next question, please.
Thank you. Right, this is a question from Christian, and Mike, I think you'll like this question. So Christian's asking, all the elements that we've looked at this morning, are any of these achievable and doable by a confident self-builder, or would you recommend getting a qualified installer in?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? This is the old DIY, saving money on doing the work yourself. I think we've got legion stories there of people who said, "Well, how hard can it be? I'll buy the bits and have a go," and have lived to regret live to regret what they've done. because it obviously looks like a DIY job. There's a reason why people get trained up to do this, and there's specialist installers. I've always said to people that if you have got the DIY skills and you're confident with what you can do, and bear in mind that a lot of self-builders who do get involved in building their own homes have got something to do with the trades. You know, they understand the process, they've got friends, relatives and all the rest that can help them out, or they've got a very good turn of hand. I think anyone who's actually tried to lay bricks, for example, themselves, think, well, how hard can it be just putting a brick on top of a bed of mortar? Can see the end results. I've seen some absolutely appalling finishes with some lovely bricks ruined by splatterings of mortar all over from people who thought it was a perfectly good effort. But let's ask other people. I mentioned bricks there. Mark, DIY, maybe something like brick slips or something is something that people might be able to contemplate themselves, since they've got a template to work to.
Well, just on the amateur bricklayer at the moment, I wish I could show you the picture out of my window of my neighbour building his own garage. It's hilarious, it really is. So again, you know, bricklayers, a good bricklayer is definitely worth his salt. I mean, very much down to you know, the quality of the work he can do, the experiences that he's got. We're not. As a brick manufacturer, I mean, I know we offer brick slips, and a lot of the brick manufacturers, you know, bigger brick manufacturers, got their own systems. Again, it's very much got to be a specialist installer that's doing it, and even then, I think we're still a little bit dubious about the long-term benefits of durability more than anything else, and longevity of slip systems. So laying bricks, definitely leave it to the professionals, or pop round to my place and come and watch my neighbour as he, as you say, throws mortar all over the place and gets 5 to 10 to 15 millimetre mortar joints. It's quite comical.
Radical. Okay, Alex, what about from the application of renders? Is that the sort of thing which could be attempted by a competent DIY?
I think so. Everyone's going to say the same. I tend to say to people, if you've got good trowel skills, then generally, yeah, you probably, if you're confident with your trowel skills, then yeah, you can probably do the render. I mean, putting the system together, you do need to understand how the system together and understands the details. But you know, we can offer support on that. But yeah, I think, you know, it depends on how confident you are in your own competency. You know, I would still say you're probably better off getting an approved installer in and getting, you know, and going for that. You know, you'll get probably a quicker job done. You can pass that responsibility over. But yeah, it's probably being experienced the trowel, because a lot of our products come pre-mixed. It's not so much of a concern from, you know, learning how to mix, because plasterers will say, again, the mix right is one thing, but it's more of that competency with a trowel.
Yeah.
On the brick slip side, it's different. It's being a good tiler, really, is what you need to be on the brick slip side.
Yeah, again, often underestimated how difficult that can be to actually get it done right.
As building a brick wall, you know, it's setting it out. It's making sure that you set out so you don't end up in the middle with a funny sort of array of thin cut bricks sort of in the middle.
Hugh, I'm going to ask you, from your last answer, you alluded there to the fact that you do packs which could potentially be done on a DIY basis, you know, ready mix, if you like. Would you recommend the DIY approach?
Yeah, in kind of, it is something which is perfectly open to DIY, as Aled touched upon earlier with regards to the troweling skills, really. That's a large part of it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's some sticky stones, and you put them on the floor and you make them go flat. Yeah, how hard can it be? However, to get the quality of the finish in there, a bit like plastering, rendering, that sort of thing, if you're handy with a trowel, then you can get a higher class finish to that. You're not going to leave drag marks in there. But yeah, the product itself, there are pitfalls in the product. Resin, for example, if moisture gets into the mix when you're mixing that resin up, then it can cause bubbles and foaming in there. If the aggregate that you've sourced isn't dried and bagged, then you can get dust in there. So there's areas to be very, very mindful of. But if you're going to buy our pre-packaged DIY kits or trade packs, a lot of that risk, if you like, is taken out of the equation or reduced. And it is very much down to the skill of the tradesperson who's installing that. We started off obviously with the supply and install. Then we got our DIY kits, which are for sort of 0.5 square metre, 1 square metre. So small projects, so multiples of those. People started using those in a larger quantity, combining, you know, tens of kits, maybe even 100 kits, I think, one order. So from the back of that, we had our trade packs, which are sort of 30 square meters. So they're kind of like a hybrid between what our installation teams would do on site with a forced action mixer and what the DIY person would do of literally mixing it in a bucket. It is something which can be done. We've got videos on our website and on YouTube to give tutorials for that. And we do offer training days. We've come down to yourselves down at the NSBRC and done training days in the past for approved installers or pro resin customers. I'd say probably, yes, it is possible for a DIY person to do it, but it depends on the scale of the project. It depends on the kind of the focus that's going to be on that project. If you're doing a driveway, which is the welcome mat to your property, and you don't give such a high class finish on that, you're going to notice that as a person who's paid for it, and it's going to show up.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Last but not least, I think I could probably preempt what the answer is going to be here, Kevin, when it comes to working up on roofs and the requirement for specialist equipment for doing a standing seam in the right place at the right time without killing you or anybody else. I personally wouldn't recommend a DIY approach, but is there am I right or wrong on that?
No, actually, the slides I showed were two projects done by visitors from the NSBRC. So husband and wife, or husband, if you like, and mate did a cracking job. It's down to the complexity of the shape. I'm going to be honest. If we got a drawing and we honestly felt it was something that we could provide as a preformed kit with confidence that could be fitted on site by a competent person, happy to sell it, happy to help them. There are times when we have to draw a line and say it has to be a specialist crew, this job.
Did you rent out the specialist equipment for that, or?
Yeah, we have tool hire, and it's not a problem. It's ideally what we want is a case study at the end of the job. We don't want to go out and condemn it or laugh at somebody's attempt. It's a genuine support role we have.
Excellent, good. Thank you very much indeed. I think that answers the question. Harvey, you got time for another one?
Yeah, we're going to, if it's okay with everyone, we're just going to run on for 10 more minutes because I know we started this session a little bit late. So if anyone's attending and they need to get going, that's absolutely fine. So just before I ask the next question, the next session, so session 4, starts at 2 p.m, so in an hour's time, and that's on internal finishes. So all things internal, that'll be facilitated by my colleague Katie, and we'll be joined by Dave Hilton, who's one of our resident experts. So yeah, we'll go for 10 more minutes. So I had a couple of questions around planning restrictions. So are there scenarios where your products are not appropriate, or are there any tips that you have to avoid getting bogged down in planning issues?
Planning, that's well, I think as I mentioned in my presentation earlier on, planners can have an influence in what's happening, and vernacular comes into it when you have specific areas. I mean, I would immediate thing that springs into my head is if you're in the middle of a conservation area or an area of outstanding natural beauty, such as the Cotswolds, for example, and you want to put something radical in the middle of what is a typical Cotswold stone village, then that can be an issue with the planners, and they can balk against it. But planning advice, and let's see what the panelists think. I'm going to start. I'm going to start with Alex here on the rendering side. Do you come across planning issues with your product?
Yes, I think any person who works probably externally has some planning issues. I won't go on with my woes of planning and why. It depends where you are in the country, what sort of rules. Generally, there has been a drive when you talk about permitted developments and things like that, making buildings more energy efficient, that there is planning can be somewhat sympathetic to if you say, look, I'm going to make this building more energy efficient, but this is the system I'm going. You will get some sympathy from planning, and depending where you are, you may need not have to go for full planning. You probably go for building control approval, but you wouldn't probably need to go for full planning. If you're in a conservation area, then yes, that your planning is going to come a bit stricter in that sense. Quite often what we'll do on some properties is people will look at maybe having, if you've got a brick fronted property or something, and you want to change your look from, you want to put EWI, you don't want to pay for brick all the way around. What you could do sometimes, you'll get away putting render on the side and the back, and then possibly looking at, either internal insulation or a brick slip system then on the front of the property. So reducing the cost, because obviously going to a full brick slip system is quite a big cost increase then.
Kevin, how does it go with metal roofing systems? Are they universally accepted by planners, or can there be issues?
It's getting better. It's been a long uphill struggle, but in a positive way. No, I think it's sometimes it's education. The planners looking and understanding what will happen to the materials. Some materials you can put on bright and they'll turn grey. Some materials will turn green. So I think it's just a little bit of education.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Not normally a block.
Okay, Mark, when it comes to brick, I'm presuming that most places within the UK, planners will have come across and approved brick in their time, but do you come across situations where it can be an issue?
Oh, well, definitely so. I mean, again, I touched on my presentation that it's very difficult to get a blue brick specified in a buff brick area or a stone area, but it's certainly not unknown. And again, something that Alan touched on about. I mean, things like, you know, sort of the green credentials of brick, particularly, you know, and the fact that planners are now, as with architects, very much looking at the sustainability issues of product specification. And if you think that actually most bricks in the UK, they probably generally only travel, you know, no less than maybe sort of 70 miles from production point to site. I mean, these are all plus points, you know, and as I say, as I pointed out, sustainability is a major topic. So there is sympathy in that, and brick again is a product that is so prevalent in the UK, in the British Isles, that it's not a massive problem from a company like ours, and certainly probably not from other manufacturers either.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, the whole point of brick in the outset was it was made with the local materials. That's why.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Most towns had a brickyard. You know, they had a quarry and a brickyard. I mean, that has changed massively over the years, but even then, you know, there are bricks coming from all over the world, but you know, generally now the sustainability issues, you know, questions about the environmental impact of bricks is becoming more and more a point.
Very few of them are air freighted, I gather.
One or two, and we've done it as well, but you know, mostly our bricks usually travel within the UK and are very much local to our factory as well.
I may continue. Good.
Mike, sorry, so we've got a very specific planning question for Hugh that's come through from Fiona. So Hugh, Fiona's doing a new build, and that part of their planning conditions state it's a no-dig construction. Mike, you might explain to everyone what a no-dig construction restriction is actually.
Yeah.
Can she use your system, Hugh, with a cellular containment on their driveway?
Right. Okay. Good. It's a good point. A no-dig driveway. As the name suggests, this is where there are conditions in the ground, which means that you can't excavate and put in what would normally be the footings for a typical driveway or a sustainable driveway, because typically it's tree roots. You know, you've got mature trees around the place, and you've got major taproots and things in the area. And if you were to dig down and excavate those, then the tree would be at risk. So the idea is that a no-dig driveway uses supports or sits over the top and acts as a load-bearing surface over the top to spread the impact of the load of the driveway and anything that's on it over a broader area without disturbing what's underneath. You could also find things like pipe work, sewer pipes and that sort of thing underneath a driveway, all those sort of reasons. So Hugh, I shall pass straight over to you and say, is it possible to do that, to answer the question?
Yeah, of course it is. As you touched upon, sort of generally the reasons are more commonly going to be a TPZ, tree protection zone. So those areas where I think, as Harvey mentioned, Fiona's question was about particularly using a plastic cellular structure. So as you saw in the presentation, we've got our shore cell, which is used. That's a 52 mil deep plastic grid, which can be used in particularly in this instance. We did a job in Elephant and Castle in London. There was a number of pathways around the back which were no dig or reduced dig areas. So we used the cellular structure there. Then the resin bound is laid on top. What we say with all of our specifications is to consult with a local specialist engineer who will give you the particular build-up that's required, and then consult with our technical department so we can give you what would be needed for that finish. But as I said earlier in the presentation, generally the strength of the finished surface, the majority of that is born from the build-up of the base. So it's crucial to get that base correctly laid, correctly installed, obviously, with being mindful for what's included in terms of a TPZ, for example, to make sure that you're not digging down too deep. But yeah, it's fully possible to be laid onto a no-dig system. We've done it on roof decks, balconies, lots of different areas where the build-up is vastly reduced. And so we've done that in the past on a number of different projects, regardless of whether it's a roof deck of a car park over an open area below, or similar to this instance, a driveway that's impacted by sort of vegetation around it that you can't dig in air. So yeah, that focusing on that specific question, but on going back to the original question that was put to the panel about the planning restrictions or issues with planning permission, we've not really come across a huge number of issues with the specification of resin-bound paving in areas, as the panel touched upon. Being sympathetic to the individual planning situation around your area is one thing, but ticking the boxes of the green credentials, the SUDS compliant, fully permeable, those types of things. The fact that you can get the appearance of loose gravel, but without the gravel being dragged across out onto the highway, because you obviously have to brush that all up and that type of thing. So it is quite sort of planning friendly. And if you're doing it on a driveway, then it doesn't need specific planning permission because it is fully permeable as well.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Harvey, time for another one?
Yeah, I think just one more, which is something that we did yesterday, actually. So I think with a couple of minutes left, just what are the panel's final kind of takeaway? Bearing in mind that this session is all about external finishes, what is that one piece of advice that you'd like to give the attendees today for them to take away and think about?
Yeah, it's a good last question to have, I think. I mean, the external finish of your house is one of those things that's you want to do it once. Nobody's going to be thinking about replacing the bricks on your house after a couple of years because you got bored with them, or replacing the render, or digging up the driveway unless you have to. So it's worth getting it right from the outset and getting your spending your money where it counts. So what would be the one bit of advice? Let's go down from the top and just start with Mark and say, what's the one bit of advice you give to the self-builder?
Well, there was a wonderful campaign, I'm old enough to remember, back in the 1970s, called Brick is Beautiful. And it was, it pretty much says exactly on the tin. I mean, it's one of those materials that's been around for so long. It's tried and tested. It's, it's economically viable, and it's just a beautifully aesthetic product. I mean, and it's there to stay. It's low maintenance, and as I say, brick does a fantastic job. And the way that things are going for our industry at the moment, I think it's going to be a fabulous future for us. It certainly seems that way. So just look at the aesthetic straight away and just see that 70% of your wall is basically the external finish, and if that's in brick, it's usually very beautiful.
Absolutely, I agree. Okay, Kevin, the takeaway for you, what would be your one thing that you pass on to aspiring self-builders or custom builders?
Take some sensible independent advice. Look at the range of materials, the behavior of those materials in terms of life expectancy, warranties, guarantees. Read the small print. There's a lot of blah blah out there from certain manufacturers, and you're putting a roof on. It's protecting your house. Protect yourself and take some sensible advice, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. It's sound advice, I'd say. Last but not least, Hugh, what piece of takeaway advice would you give to our viewers today?
Well, hopefully not last, because you missed poor Aled out, but I'll step in and then we can hand over to Aled to round off. I think research would probably be my main takeaway piece of advice, and that goes right the way through the whole project, really. Research what you want your finished project to look like, get the right materials, the right aggregate, obviously using resin-bound paving. Research the build-up for the base, as we touched upon with the TPZ, that type of thing. Research the environmental constraints that might be imposed on your planning application. Just go away and read about it. Research what you're looking to actually achieve as a finish and how you're going to get there along your journey. There's lots of different ways you can get there, but as you said, the previous work that you do would impact on what your next stage is going to be. So if you've laid the base in a way which isn't in accordance with what your planning is or with what the final area is going to be used for, it's not going to give you the longevity of the project or the finished product that you want to do. So go away and find out, come down to the NSBRC, research there, go around to the various stalls, have a look at what you've got online. SureSet's website is very comprehensive. There's a lot of information out there. Just read about it before you do it. It's like the old adage, isn't it? You buy cheap, you buy twice. Find out what you're looking to do. Make sure you've got a legitimate contractor to install it. Make sure you've got the right products sourced from a responsible area, and it's using a high quality product to get the high quality finish you're looking for.
Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, you raise a good point there. I mean, at the start of these shows, we occasionally do a poll to see who's actually been to the centre and who's been there before. And it's always interesting to find that not everyone has. In fact, a good chunk of people have heard about the centre but have never actually made the effort to come and see. And when the pandemic and what have you is over and we're back to normality, I can't stress enough the need to, if you get the chance, come down and have a look and see the 67,000 square feet of exhibitor space where all you guys are represented there. And you can actually see close up the products, you can get expert advice, there's always somebody there you can speak to. And it's a great way to actually see exactly what we're talking about, and you can make up your own mind. Now, Alex, I do apologise. You slipped to one slot away on my screen up there, and it threw me. So I do apologise. I didn't mean to miss you out there. So you will be last but not least on this one.
I'll probably say the same. The other, I think you put it, I would say don't be scared and get in touch with suppliers like ourselves and that, and really, look at the options you've got out there. We cover a vast range of different options, and we'll be quite open on saying these are the pros and cons, like I said, in the different incidents. Each one has its pro and its con, and it'll depend on the scenario you're looking at. And don't be afraid to ask those questions, I think, from the suppliers. And like I said, visit centres like yourselves to see the real life samples. In terms of facades, my bit of advice I always tell, particularly when you sit with architects, is proper detailing is the key. No matter what material you put on the facade, if you don't get your detailing right, then you can have something that's never going to get, people claim it'll never get dirty and things like that. If you haven't got the detailing right, so making sure that you've got your overhangs, your sills, and there's sufficient overhangs there, making sure you're taking that wastewater away from that face of the facade. So that would be my bit of advice, really. It's worthwhile spending your time to get the detail right at the start.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the, just to finish off with on there, from my experience, in the 15 odd years I've been playing around in this game on here, one of the recurring themes from people who are actually embarking on the project halfway through is the overwhelming choice that's out there, and making the decision, and a underlying terror of buying the wrong thing, or buying having buyer's regret later on after buying something. And something I would sort of reassure there is that people who come and exhibit in the centre, by definition, aren't the fly-by-night people who you are trying to avoid. The people who have established, they've got good reputations, a reputation to keep, and can give you the sort of product that you're looking for on there. So it's always a good place to start with. So it's great to see such high quality and knowledgeable people coming here to share their information with us today. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, just echo that, Mike. So thank you very much to all the panelists. It's been a really enjoyable session, very informative, a lot to take away. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for chairing it and hosting it so well as well. Really appreciate that. And for the recommendation to come and visit the centre. Obviously, as soon as our doors are open, we will let you all know, and we will welcome you with open arms and be thrilled to show you just, the sheer range of products and potential things that you might be interested in for your project. So we'd be very happy to welcome you. So thank you to Hugh, to Mark, to Ali, to Kevin for your time this morning. Thank you to everyone that's attended. We hope you've enjoyed it. We will be reappearing. It won't be myself, it will be my colleague Katie Hardwick. You might recognise the surname there. It's Mike's daughter who works at the centre, and she will be hosting the afternoon session, which starts at 2 o'clock. So we'll be opening that up for you to join on Eventbrite in about 15 minutes. So we're going to get going now. The copy of this recording will be available, and we'll send it out at some point next week. So hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you all very much, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Harvey.
Take care, guys. See you guys. Thanks again.